I want you to know before we get into this, I have feelings about this movie, and I fell asleep, and it took me 48 hours to get through it. It was hard. It was hard, guys.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hello!
And today, we are going to find out what evil lurks in the hearts of men, because only one person knows what that is, and that person is Pat Edwards.
Hi, all my buddies.
Hi!
The Pat knows.
The Pat knows. At least someone knows.
I didn't realize that was so I say hi. I don't always do it, but I often will go, hi, all my buddies, when I'm introduced on like a podcast or something. That is a very obscure reference to Thrilling Adventure Hour. I don't know if either of you are familiar.
I am not.
Okay. It was a live stage show, but also was a podcast that was put on by Ben Acker and Ben Blacker. They're like prolific TV writers. They wrote a couple of seasons of Supernatural. It had a consistent group of actors: Paul F. Tompkins, Busy Phillips, Nathan Fillion was in and out a lot. Hal Lublin, a lot of good voice actors. Mark Evan Jackson, and they did this live show, but it was like it was on stage, but it was all in the style of an old-timey radio play. And they had all these little vignettes, and they had a few that were super consistent, like Sparks, Nevada, Marshall on Mars. So it was like kind of like space opera. It was like a Western on Mars. And like the Martians were stand-ins for Native Americans, and like he's the marshal of the whole planet. And they would do this thing Beyond Belief, which was Paul F. Tompkins and Paget Brewster. Do you know that she's in Criminal Minds? She's been in a ton of stuff. Playing this like roaring 20s or 30s New York socialite couple who can see ghosts and like battle supernatural things. And they would always start at the beginning of that segment. They would go, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? And then one of them would go, as long as evil's carrying the martini tray, because their thing is they were drunks. And they would always be like shit-faced while they were fighting ghosts.
I mean, that fits very well in with what we're talking about today.
1000%.
Yeah, because today's movie is a superhero story with a 3-drink minimum. Today we are talking about The Shadow.
Yes, I'm so excited. Sam is not as excited as I am, and that's okay. Don't worry, I brought enough excitement for everyone.
I appreciate that you did, and I will say that there are things that I did like about this movie. There were just not enough of them for me to be excited about this movie.
Should we do the genesis of why this episode is happening?
Yeah. If we're lucky, this will come out at about the same time. So let's find out.
Okay. So we're going to go off of not release schedule, but recording schedule. So Pat, I'm part of a podcast on the same network, Certain POV, Let's Rewatch. And we did The Shadow for that. And it's a different... And while I was watching Shadow, and I made this joke on the rewatch episode, that like halfway through, I stopped being part of Let's Rewatch and started being part of Another Pass, because all I could think about was how I would make this awesome, because there's so many little pieces that I would love to just rearrange. And I just want to talk about this movie more because there's so many choices that were made. And I'm like, why? Why did you do that?
1000%. This movie, I feel like this is a movie where there was a hat with possible outcomes when they were writing it. And they're like, okay, what are we going to have them do next? And they're like, I don't know, stick your hand in the hat. And they pulled it out and they were like, a bomb! That's what's going to happen next. That's how I feel this movie was created. Like, I don't feel like they even thought about it. Like, they didn't even try to like... be like, well, why would he do that? Why would he do that? You know what? Let's not spend time talking about that. Let's just do it. Like, I was like,
yes.
What the Frau, like this is someone's fever dream. Like, this is a very beautiful, it is such a beautiful, like, the sets are awesome. And they do such a good job at creating, like, a world. I mean, it doesn't necessarily feel like authentic New York, but it feels authentic in the sense that everything in the design fits, right? So everything in the movie fits together, and it feels like an era and like a comic unto itself. But then they just make these batshit crazy choices, and you're like, why?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it looks I think it looks great, and it's consistent like throughout.
Costuming is great. Costuming is great also. It may
I'd
not
say
be
costuming is 99% great. There's one area you might
Yeah, that's a big one that we'll talk about.
It may not be like, culturally accurate for a lot of things.
Oh, well, that too. Yeah.
And the prosthetics, whether they were needed or not.
We'll just say the costumers almost hit it right on the nose, but not quite.
Oh, I like that. But I will say that I thought that like everybody looked really good all of the time.
Yes.
Yeah, 100% on that.
And the cast is bananas.
The cast is Ian McKellen is wasted.
Yes.
Well, yes, but also Ian McKellen was very not early in his career, obviously, but like he wasn't as well known to American audiences at that point.
I know, but
but-
he's got like 4 lines. Like,
Case, do you have that stuff like ready or in front of you at all? Or because I mean, just going down the
In terms
line.
of his career?
No, the cast, because you got Alec Baldwin, Ian McKellen, Tim Curry, and then tons of like recognizable faces and people you've seen.
Yeah.
And the actor who played Shiwan Khan, he's been in stuff. He was the bad guy in the second Rush Hour movie.
yeah, I think he was also in,
John Lone,
yeah.
Yeah.
Peter Boyle, Jonathan Winters, tons of like recognizable faces.
Yeah, I mean, there are movies where we sort of have to hold ourselves back from saying like, oh yeah, we need to recast this part, but I mean, they cast that person for clout or for name recognition or whatever. This movie, I don't feel ever needs to be recast per se. I think every single person is like, yeah, that's a 100% solid choice to be in that part, and it's actually kind of an incredible get.
And then I love the aesthetic of this movie, and it comes at that. I don't know if you did research on that Case. It comes at that time in the 90s when they were just because Batman, the first Batman, had come out in 1989. You know how like it's that great adage when we talk about is that studios love to take the wrong lesson from successful movies.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't, and they're like, oh, people want like pre-World War II era adventure movies. So we're going to give them The Phantom and The Rocketeer and The Shadow and Darkman and all the like that's what about Batman is that pseudo 1930s aesthetic. That's what made Batman great.
Right, because all the studio heads at this point were like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I liked Batman, I liked Dick Tracy, I liked The Shadow, I liked Phantom, and all the studio heads are like, yeah, that sounds great. We'll greenlight that because that's what kids like.
Right. Yes. Kids of the 90s love pre-war aesthetic.
Yep.
I mean, some of that is not untrue. Like
Right.
I mean, I'm a nerd.
What?
I acknowledge this.
No.
No one's
Media.
surprised.
You? What? Oh, shocking. No, end this podcast now. I can't believe the news. Go on, Case. Sorry.
Breaking news here.
But I used to track down like the Pulp Fiction Adventures of the Shadow, and I have a whole bunch of the radio shows on CD and cassette, and like I was like very into it, and in the ballpark of like probably this movie is the thing that got me to like first seek it out because just based on timing of things, but like I was very into the idea when the movie was announced. I was like, oh, that's really cool, and like. I don't know. For me, finding out about a superhero that people have forgotten about, I get really excited. That's just the thing I like to do. I like to do research.
Yeah, Shadow's like super, super, super OG. I mean, the creator of Batman cited Shadow as an influence on Batman.
The supposed creator of Batman.
Okay, sorry. Yes.
The person who claims to have created Batman.
Allegedly.
Yes. But you can see it.
Absolutely. And like, there's some interesting conversations to be had about the origins and then the perpetual fandom of the respective characters. I mean, like, how familiar are the two of you with like the franchise as a whole, not just this movie?
I mean, other than knowing that it was like a radio mystery, I haven't really listened to the old stuff. So, but I do know that much.
I'm just because of our episode on Rewatch. I am because I hosted it where I was the person who did the research. I was the research jockey for that episode. So strictly for that, I now know a lot more about the Shadow than I did like 3 weeks ago.
Full disclosure.
Yeah. So for the people who are not familiar with it, basically what happened is that the Shadow was created initially as an announcer for a radio series, kind of akin to like the Crypt Keeper from Tales of the Crypt. So they would do like crime stories and he would narrate the opening and closing kind of stuff. And kids were really interested in that. People like really dug that idea. So the producers were like, hey, why don't we try to flesh out this character a bit? And so they kind of sort of, I say kind of sort of created Pulp Fiction, at least as we sort of define it, because I would argue that Pulp Fiction has always existed and continues to exist. But like what usually people refer to when they talk about Pulp Fiction started around this time where it was like very cheap paperbacks that people could buy that had some illustrations, had really striking covers, and were often either short stories that were like exciting adventures or serialized stories that were exciting adventures. And so they had the Shadow in that and had a whole bunch of crazy adventures that when they decided that they wanted to adapt it into a proper radio show about the character, they were like, we can't use any of this. So they didn't. And they have basically a totally unique character for the radio show who has psychic powers. Now, the weird part about how that all works and how it's like, oh, well, he can hypnotize people so you can't see him, is that it works really well for radio as a narrative device. If you compare the Shadow with the Superman radio shows, they actually have almost the exact same structure of every conflict because effectively the Shadow is invulnerable. Like they can't have violence, really. He's just able to observe, and if he shows up, he can just stop you, and you can't do anything about it. And that's always just the Shadow. And it's the same deal with Superman. He heard you from afar, he jumped in, I'm going to shoot you, bang, bang, nothing happens. And then it's the same actual arcs of how those work. It works really well for radio shows. And that's actually why Batman doesn't work as a radio show. They kept trying to do pilots for Batman radio shows, and it just never worked because it's just, you're not getting anything that's interesting about Batman by hearing his voice. Kevin Conroy aside, you're not getting the costume. You're not getting any of the cool, moody, like dark drawings or anything like that. You lose all of it. Like there's no hook. And so it just never really like clicked that way. So the Shadow continued on, to the 50s, as long as like radio serials about like superheroes were popular, and went about as long as the Superman show, and that worked that way. Batman didn't, and it did not have the huge pop culture appeal. But Batman had more successful finger quotes on that one, like movie serials that then later, like infamously, the story about how like the 66 Batman show happened was that at the Playboy Mansion, they decided one night to basically do a Mystery Science Theater 3000 night, watching the old Batman serials and all just getting drunk and making fun of it. And a producer there was like, fuck, adults really like making fun of Batman. We should make a show about this. And that's how the 66 Batman show
they were
happened.
intentionally then making it like as campy as fucking possible because they...
Oh, yeah. It was intended for adults to laugh at while the kids enjoyed.
What I'll say about the Shadow, just if anyone doubts how big of a deal the Shadow was in its heyday, fucking Orson Welles played the Shadow for a short period of time.
Yes. And that is a thing that they talk about a lot in this because everyone's just like, it's a part that was originated by Orson Welles. Yeah. Which is kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, so the Shadow didn't really like once it had moved on, like he had comic books that never really worked out as much. The Shadow benefits actually from not being able to see him that much. Like the covers are really striking.
That's his whole thing.
After that, yeah, exactly. It's his thing. And so as a result, like visual media don't really play nice with his power set. But yeah, so then the character is mostly just known for like these taglines and like all this stuff. And then you get to the era of people being like, well, let's just make the wrong movies. And man, did they want to make Batman when they made this movie?
Oh.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Should we do
Like of all of them, this is the one where like the score sounds just like the Batman score. Yeah, so Jerry Goldsmith, like previously had just done Supergirl, and his whole shtick basically was like trying to make scores that sound a lot like other superhero soundtracks.
I mean, if you watch this and the '89 Batman like close together, you would be like, "Holy shit!" Because it's biting the style very hard.
Yeah, they even have like things that sound like bat sound effects. Like there's like one big swooping shot through the city, going to like Reinhardt Lane's lab, and like the music sounds just like Batman, and there's this like skittering sound that's just bats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But should we start? Do we go through the movie kind of some play by play? Because the opening scene. Should we talk about the opening?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, appropriation, and how
the
awkward.
racism. The racism.
Yeah.
I think because if we're going to talk about the opening scene specifically, which so grandly sets it up, I think we got to talk about that. So
yes.
Yeah, his real name.
Yeah.
His real name is a Chinese name. Yeah. And I actually like wrote to Case at one point. Maybe it wasn't Case. Maybe it was actually my boyfriend. I was like, what language is he speaking? Because I couldn't tell what he was trying, like what Alec Bolton, like what language he was trying to speak. I now know it's Mandarin because later on in the movie. But oh my God. Okay,
Well,
someone else needs to talk about this.
I think his real name is Lamont Cranston. His like warlord name was Yin Ko.
Right. And supposedly, and I haven't been able to find much specific, IMDb trivia says that it's not actually words that he says whenever he's speaking quote unquote Mandarin.
Really?
It's just sounds, which is terrible.
That's bad. That's
It's
not
even
good.
worse.
How hard would that have been to just like read, like say this? That would not have been hard to do.
That's like even worse.
It's rough. It was 1994, so I can imagine it being. Well, I say that, but then like there is actually a surprising number of Asian actors in this movie.
It's like they were like trying to make up for it, but also not. Like I don't know. It was this whole movie has a hard on for Asia, but like not in a good way at all, and it's really it's weird. It's
a hard part about the Shadow when you're trying to adapt him, because the opening narration of the radio show talks about how he goes off to the Orient, and that's where he learned the Oriental tricks of clouding men's minds with hypnosis. Like that's baked into the official story that was what most people know. And again, that's only the radio show. The Pulps actually have a totally different kind of vibe on all that. He actually has no superpowers in the Pulps. He's just good at sneaking around. So it's different things kind of going on there. But they decided that they were like, let's just play it up. Let's just lean into it as opposed to doing anything else.
In the original, I wanted to ask this because I don't know if you know. Was he an opium dealer in the original? Do you know?
No, so they create a backstory on that one. They actually make it worse.
like I was just like, so
he always was like someone who went off.
He's like a drug warlord.
Yeah, he's a drug warlord that is peddling opium in China, and then the monks basically like snatch him up to basically balance him out. So because he knows darkness, so he'll be able to do this, and they give him a good heart, but he knows darkness, so then he can help them fight darkness.
I mean, that whole transition it's terrible. Yeah, because he has zero. We'll talk about that. Because he has zero desire to be a good guy, and all of a sudden he's just down for it. We cut to that whole opening scene is so bananas from the fucking nails. What's like his
just his whole outfit? The whole outfit. This is the one outfit.
The wig, the other terrible prosthetic in this.
The wig. Yeah. The wig is the worst wig. Like I was just like, they could not find a good wig for this guy. Like this is the one place they cut the budget, like on this wig. I can get a good wig at Halloween Adventure.
Oh, it's not the one place. Come on now.
It was really good of them, though. It was really fortunate they were able to lease that temple from Cobra Commander, though.
First of all,
should we?
Did the knife? Did the weird anthropomorphic knife?
Oh, the
is
knife.
Is that what convinced him to be a good guy? Like, did it beat him into submission? Like, was it like it dancing around in front of him and being like, "Whoa, the monk's got a point. I should be a good guy because of this weird ass fucking knife," which is
preview of the future. The knife was my biggest sticking point for my pitch. I'm like, what am I going to do with this? I literally wrote my notes. What am I going to do with this knife?
It's like, first of all, like, I also have no idea what I would do with the knife, but was that the thing, guys? Because I was like, because the monk is like basically like, or basically his master is basically like, you're gonna face this knife, and it basically goes after him, and then afterwards it's like, okay, he's gonna be good now. Was it the knife?
Yeah, he's never even like excited about the prospect of the powers or anything. Like that's the weird part. Like he just transitions from being like shown that there are superpowers. Like, so this movie is just Doctor Strange. Like, yeah, like complete, like the exact structure. And to be fair, Doctor Strange ripped it off from this. But the weird part about that with this movie is that there isn't the moment of just teach me. Like when Doctor Strange is like, oh shit, there's weird stuff. Can I learn? He never expresses an interest in learning. He never expresses a remorse or guilt for doing anything. Like there's a lot of ways you can make it work. This movie just decides not to do any of it.
Yeah, yes. It's and then, okay, so like, you know, I am definitely like, he's also just got an obsession, right? Like the first date he goes out with, you know, the female lead, he takes her to have Peking duck. There's just like a whole bunch of things. Second thing I'm most offended by is the description of my hometown in this movie.
The vile den of villainy or whatever.
I took a picture of it because I was so mad. I was like, thus, armed, Cranston returned to his homeland, that most wretched lair of villainy we know as New York City. Fuck you, The Shadow. Fuck you.
Geez, Sam, don't you know us Midwesterners? We're just afraid of the big city out east. It's just full of crime. Don't you know? We just like our quiet lives. I'm a Midwesterner, just in case anyone doesn't realize that. I'm like,
yes, he can make jokes like this.
Yeah, a Midwesterner from the home of Al Capone.
Yeah, I'm originally from Chicago. Not really. Yeah, I know it's very different. Yeah.
Take that, villainy.
The home of arguably the most famous real gangster of all time. Yes, like
right.
You know, Chicago, that bastion of like lawfulness and calm and no
crime, nothing. But I was like watching it almost just like, because after like watching basically like the first half scene and just being like, what the hell am I watching? And then like reading that, I was like, oh no, you don't, movie. I can't believe you. I was just like, wow.
Yeah, that whole opening, because they don't do the work, is so frustrating. Yeah. Like, they do everything but the important scenes of that flashback, and then they do a text crawl, and then they do what should have been just the cold opening of the movie.
Okay, don't get ahead.
Yes. I know. We're not trying to get into pitches yet. Yeah. But like, because like, here's the thing. So this movie comes out right after Batman Returns, and also right after Dick Tracy. So it's in that sort of that's where it falls in the sort of history of these like Pulp Fiction adaptations. Which, side note, I still can't get over that the only fucking adaptation of Doc Savage we've ever gotten was the fucking Man of Bronze in the 70s. But moving on, like, so I get that they're trying to make things not just be beat for beat Batman. And somehow, and again, we're talking about movies that come after. It's also beat for beat Batman Begins, which is also the same thing as Doctor Strange.
And Iron Fist.
Both of those
Rich white guy from New York goes to the Far East to learn ability. It's all fucked up. It's all shitty. It's all racist.
It's all fucked up. But the thing is, those at least have a modicum of story structure that makes it important. Like the whole opening scene, aside from being like, well, we're going to see him meet the I forget the name of the one who trains him.
Tulku. It's Tulku.
Tulku. Yeah. It's like, why? Like, again, as we keep saying, he's shown to be terrible. And I get that was an inclusion that they introduced to sort of like give him pathos and sort of an arc of being like, oh, he's a bad guy who's trying to take what's bad about him, his dark soul, and make him and use it as a force for good.
But he's not trying to do that. It was forced onto him. He didn't.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. It's forced on him. He's not even excited at the prospect of power that leads him down a path. Like you could imagine someone who is like a soul like this finding out about the Force and becoming a Jedi and becoming very stoic and like restrained because the power itself enticed him and like maybe even stays on the correct path. Like none of that. It's just like he gets stabbed a couple of times and be like, well, now I'm going to teach you about fucking hypnotism.
This is a big issue with me for the movie. I just don't understand because there's nothing in him that is like, oh, I do want to turn over a new leaf for that kind of thing, you know, because Doctor Strange kind of has that, right? Like he has this loss. He loses his ability as a surgeon. And so he's searching for something because he's lost who he is, right? There's nothing here for that. So like when Khan shows up and is like, join me and we can be powerful, what stops him? Like, I didn't understand what would stop him from taking that sweet, sweet deal of, like, using his powers. Like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Like, why? Why are we walking this straight and narrow path? I don't understand. There's no motivation.
This movie starts with the supposition that the Shadow is the good guy.
Right.
Even if they try to make him like muddied and like,
I mean, he's a dick.
Like they assume.
Oh no, he's like fucking awful. He's like a really terrible
even as
person.
the Shadow. Even when he's a good guy, he's a dickhead. He's a jerk to his people, like his indentured servants.
Yeah, he's just basically like, I saved your life, so you're my slave now. You owe me your life.
Okay, but I want to talk about is the first person when he came back to New York that he saved?
Yes.
Was the first person he saved a jeweler so he could make those rings. He could make them.
Absolutely. 1000%.
So he just followed a jeweler around. I'm going to wait till they're in trouble. They'll be the first person to save. And then I'm like, you're my agent.
He probably set them up for being in trouble. Like,
yeah, he paid someone to like mug him or something. And then so he could save him. And then he's like, all right, you're going to make me like 30 of these rings.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Oh my gosh, this movie.
Yeah.
Which, okay, so as far as him being rich, as far as him being rich, I thought it was just, I guess he's rich, his family or something. But I was browsing the IMDb trivia. There's like a novelization of the movie and there's extended stuff. Apparently, even though he's a good guy now, he took his wealth that he accumulated as a opium warlord.
So his drug money?
With him back to New York, and that's how he's funded his mansion and his whole system. Yes.
I just makes everything so much worse. I don't.
Oh yeah, when you shine a light on this Shadow, it gets less and less and less substantial.
But the Shadow knows.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
Also, sorry, just a side note. Also, how fucking racist? Like, it's like, all right, I have opium fields because I'm in China. Like the whole opium wars were about like Chinese people being like, or the Chinese government being like, stop Britain importing opium. Fuck you guys. You're turning us into a drug den. And they're like, no, fuck you. We're going to keep bringing drugs in. That is some Western imperialist like rewriting of history.
Oh, I mean, the
movie's.
Yeah, I mean, it wears it on his sleeve when he interrupts. I mean, we'll get to it later when he's like, you're talking about the U.S. of A, bud. Later, it's like it's very I mean, like it's even very jingoistic.
Even freaking poor Khan, like poor Lang has to say this line where he's just like, "My Mongolian warriors are not very smart, but they're loyal," and I was like, "Oh, yeah." I would have hated to be an Asian actor who had to say that. out loud.
Yeah.
Like I get it. Like, henchmen aren't usually smart, but also like this whole movie is just so fucking
How about
hard.
his chief henchman is a white guy in Mongolian armor.
Oh my god, yeah. There's so much. Like, first of all, I don't even think that's really Mongolian armor. Like, it looks so much more like Japanese instead. It looks so much more samurai. And I decided not to look it up. I decided not to look it up because I was like, it's just going to make me angry.
Are you implying that the creators of this incredibly nuanced and sensitive movie did not do the research on what is authentic Genghis Khan era Mongolian warrior armor? I don't believe it.
I have a very clear picture of what Genghis Khan looked like and what he wore, and it's definitely not that. And I was like, I'm not going to look it up, but how dare I insinuate that? How dare I? They were so responsible with everything else.
It's rough because, like, clearly what they're trying to do is they're trying to lean in with the very racist radio show overtones. And they're trying to make kind of a joke about it, but in ways that are, like, a little dumb. And if you're not really paying attention, you might think that they're overly serious at most points, and, like, just not in good taste anyway. Like, the whole thing.
Yeah, this entire movie could not be made right now the way the script is. Like, if you left the script the way it is.
Yeah, it's not. But part of why I wanted, and again, we have plenty. I think we still have lots. We got plenty to dunk on still before we get to pitches. But I do want to preface, just kind of like playing out there. Part of why I want to talk about this movie was I was watching it. I was like, oh, this actually could have been really. I'm of the opinion this could have been good, very good and entertaining. And I think so much was done right from a production, like the visuals, the casting for the most part. I think it's purely, and that's, I think most movies you two deal with here, right? Is that's the whole point, is another pass, right? Another pass to the script. I think so much. I think it's, in this case, it's unique in that it's like 100% writing. I think the directing's pretty decent. Cinematography, costumes, like I think it's 100% writing is the flaw with this movie.
1000%.
And you don't need to do set.
I would say some acting choices also go into it, but
okay,
but sure.
Yeah, but I feel like the script doesn't really give them much. Like, I feel like poor Penelope Ann Miller, who played Margot Lane. Like, she was like a pretty lamp. Like, literally, like, she's just there to kind of like move certain parts of the story along. Like, she doesn't, other than like they establish that she's got like this special power, which then they negate kind of in their own way in like the very next scene. They don't really give her much to do. She's just very pretty. She's there. She's a love interest. Like, that's it.
I disagree a little bit. I because I think that the first half of the movie, you're 100% right. Like, she's the daughter of the scientist MacGuffin stuff. I think that once she actually becomes aware of who the Shadow is, and they get to their teamwork, because like Margot Lane in the radio show was his partner. It was never a like, I don't know who the Shadow is, Lois Lane kind of scenario. Like, it was always like they knew who, like they were clearly significant others. She knew about his identity. She was his partner. She helped out and everything. And once she's engaged in that, I think she actually does quite a bit. First of all, she figures out where the base is and what's going on with all that stuff. Like, she saves his life on multiple occasions. She's the one who actually stops the bomb. She kind of is the only actual hero, because the Shadow's terrible, like, at everything he does.
Not good.
So, like, that dynamic's great. And like, once we get to the radio show stuff in play, like, that I think is a really good vibe for the two of them. Like, it also helps Alec Baldwin as Lamont. Like, they both have great chemistry once they're actually like bickering and there's no secrets between them.
I disagree. I felt like it was really wooden. Like, I did not feel anything at all. Like, at all. Go on. Okay. I'm sorry.
I mean, we'll explore
Sam, because I'm going to put you on the spot. Sam, if you negating the fact that one of them, I feel like it is much more significant star power than the other, which one would you keep and which one would you recast if you were EP of this?
That's really hard because I don't think that individually they were bad. Like I thought that she was good, and I do think that she actually fit the role really well. I just didn't think that together they were good.
I posit that even though he's a very good looking person and a decent actor, Alec Baldwin doesn't have a ton of romantic chemistry.
Yeah,
with people, in general.
Agree. Yeah. I think
I don't know. He's too like aloof. I don't know, just like removed.
I think he's very good at like the threatening parts, which is why I would keep him. You know, like, and he's got the good whisper, you know, threatening whisper thing going down. But yeah, I think you're right. I'd probably, if it were in concern of the romantic, just because of like the chemistry, yeah, I'd probably ditch him and keep her.
Because I actually like her performance in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I did too. I thought that she was kind of fun, and I thought that she did, like, for what she had, really good line readings. And, you know, the first half of the movie was just abysmal for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize, first half of the movie, I think there's a lot of stuff going on there. And the whole movie in general, I think Alec Baldwin was given the wrong... Well, either he had a take, and he brought it to Russell Mulcahy, director of Highlander 1 and 2, and...
The Quickening?
Was like, I'm going to play this... I'm going to play this as like, oh, like not over the top, but like as goofy as possible. Like he's very in on the joke of the movie, and I think that was entirely the wrong choice. I think he should have been playing a straight man. Like the 66 Batman works because Adam West is very much like playing the straight man in a weird world. Like the people who are devouring scenery are the celebrity guest like extras that come in for each episode. Like all the villains and so forth. Like, but Adam West consistently is playing like a very like level character, and I think that's what we kind of needed with the Shadow. But instead, he's going like really fucking weird every time. All of his
you didn't like that laugh.
Like, all of his like villainous. Yeah, I mean the laugh's a hard one to balance because it is like a thing about the character.
Yeah,
but like all like I mean from the gibberish Chinese, all of his like attempts to be kind of suave, like all the time, all the interactions with his uncle, like all of those scenes, like he's like a little too like smug and cheeky about it all for a character who's supposed to be tortured.
Yeah. Oh, do we know if that's really his uncle?
That would be an interesting implication.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's part of my pitch, but
yeah. So that's an interesting question.
I just wanted to ask before I pitched it because I was like, wait, guys, did I miss this part? Did they establish they were actually related?
The police commissioner who just hangs out in tuxedos at like fancy clubs eating prime rib all day, every day.
Yeah, that guy. Okay, because I feel like he just friended him to just get the information from the police.
Oh, do you think he just like mind clouded him? He just mind controlled to be like, I'm your nephew. I'm your nephew, by the way.
Yeah, and then he just believed that permanently.
I would be down for that, but I would like the text to support that beyond like headcanon.
Yeah, no, it's just my headcanon. But I just wanted to know if, like, it would be actually possible. I was like, have we really established in the text really for reals?
I mean, it's fair. Like, there's a lot of, like, weird exposition that sounds like it was just lines fed into his brain by a neuralizer. Like,
yeah.
That's just where it is. And here's the thing where it could be interesting because So the radio show was very popular, and as a result, they backfilled details from the radio show into the Pulp Fictions, even though the Pulp Fictions had different stuff going on. So, like, his secret identity in the Pulp Fiction was a different character. He was named Kent Allard, and, like, Lamont Cranston was at first, like, a helper, and then I think he then became an alias he would sometimes take up. So you could support that Lamont Cranston, totally fake. However... We also know that Lamont Cranston is the name that they use earlier when he's in his Yin Co persona, and it's like, you know my real name. So at the very least, like that name theoretically is his real name here. I don't know. I think it would be a lot more interesting if he was vaguer about it. But I also have some thoughts about like how upfront we should have been about who the Shadow is and everything from the get-go. Because like... Again, this is following the same structure as Batman Begins and Doctor Strange, and is not doing enough with it to make it really interesting or compelling backstory for the character. Like, why the fuck do we have another student of the same school of mysticism who shows up who they didn't know each other before?
Yeah.
Because he was already sent. I don't know. But speaking of,
that's my point. Like,
can we talk about how he came to the United States?
Yes. Okay, that's a great segue because I want to talk about Shiwan Khan for like a long time. I want to talk about Shiwan Khan.
It's all. Let's talk about Shiwan Khan because he is honestly, arguably. I actually really enjoyed him. I did feel like he was in a different movie than everyone else, but I enjoy him.
He was slathered mustard on that scenery and was just num 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 num. He was just John Lone.
I would actually say that I feel like he, Alec Baldwin, and Tim Curry are in 3 different movies. They are not in the same movie at all. Somehow they're in scenes together, but they are not in the same movie.
I would argue Tim Curry's in 2 different movies at different points in this movie.
that's also fair.
All right, so go on. Let's talk about Shiwan Khan.
So, first off, we talked about how good a lot of the visual thing is. The one thing that is very bad, and this person should feel ashamed of themselves, is that fucking beard that's glued on his face. Is
so bad.
So bad. It needs to be bigger and fuller if you're gonna do that, because it's just that chin strap, and it's just like that is glued on from 15 miles away. I can see that.
I think in general, hair. Like, other than, like, the female lead's hair was an issue on this. Anytime there was a wig or a hair prosthetic, there was a problem.
He was great. My biggest issue with Shiwan Khan is so much about him is inconsistent, and not in the actor, the writing. Whereas is he metropolitan and modern, or is he of the olden times? Because it keeps going back and forth, where it's like, oh, I'm from the Far East and I'm not familiar, but he knows what Midtown is and he wants to get. And I feel like, and that's part of my pitch later, is pick one, pick a lane. Is he a modern descendant, or is he someone from the ancient times? Pick a lane, stick with it.
Or at least let him evolve. Like, you can have him be ancient in the beginning, but then let him kind of be like, oh, I realize I really like New York. Like, have him have a moment where he embraces the modern or whatever.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, Pat, I have a similar note, because when he kills the cab driver, it's like, oh, he seems very knowledgeable about modern tech. Like, that was kind of strange. And I get it that part of it is a little bit of a misdirect, because he shows up in Genghis Khan's sarcophagus,
where he absorbs his power. He was absorbing his power. Maybe that's why they never met.
Sam, you say that like there's something wrong with that statement.
Yeah,
your tone, like there's something illogical or incongruous about that statement.
Well, I mean, I guess there's just the inference that somehow Genghis Khan had mystical powers to do the things he did, which is just another thing that's like, people of color can't do things that white people can do unless they have magic powers.
Unless they have magic, yes. Very racist.
Their concept of Genghis Khan is like kind of wonky anyway, because he's like, I'm the last descendant of Genghis Khan.
Yes, I have a note, which is very not true.
That dude was spilling his seed everywhere like a cicada.
Isn't it something like 8% of Mongolian males can trace?
No, 8% of the world.
The world?
The world.
Right.
No, that's no.
He conquered from Europe all the way to China.
That guy was like, and he was like having sex everywhere he went.
Case, that's so many people.
I will Google it right now.
It's been a lot of time.
I thought it was Mongolians.
No, I think Case is right.
Yeah, because remember, the ruling dynasty that was controlling India when the British came were descendants of Genghis Khan.
Okay,
it was the Mughals.
According to National Geographic, it's 8% of men living in the region of the former Mongol Empire. So that's a lot of land. It's not just Mongolia.
Yeah.
But 0.5% of the male population of the world. That's still fucking ridiculous. A lot of people. It's 16 million descendants.
Which now it could be interesting if they said that only the descendants of Genghis Khan could use it. Interesting, noting that it's also like a little problematic, but like at least there would be some sort of through line there or something. But
well, that would actually,
Yeah.
that would still be okay. I mean, like, because, you know, he spread his seed everywhere.
Yes.
So anyway, he was absorbing his power in it. Maybe this is where he was. This is why Alec Baldwin and he never met, is because he had been in that sarcophagus. It took him that long.
We don't know how long
to
he was in
absorb
there.
powers. It's like there was a 2-year difference. Like one graduated 2 years before. It's a 2-year academy. I'm sorry, 7 years. It was 7 years, right? 7 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, about that. But in general, he's very inconsistent. And this is something I'm like looking to fix with my pitches with his tactics. Whereas if you have this mind control ability, which is so powerful, you can make someone just kill themselves, like he does with the guard. Which, side note, why is that reported as a murder when it's obvious the guard shot himself? They don't know this is like mystic, powerful being.
Yeah, it should have been suicide.
Yeah. Anyway, but it's part of me is always like, how does he decide when he's going to use mind power and when he's just going to have a henchman? Because he mind powers Ian McKellen and then he has henchmen kill the soldiers guarding Ian McKellen. Well, it's like, why didn't you just mind power the soldiers too?
why did he even do that? Because he was already controlling McKellen and just have McKellen leave.
Yeah, I could. The one thing I'll say that I'll counter is he probably couldn't leave with his like bomb thing because the soldiers
right.
Like,
No,
you're not supposed to take stuff out of the lab. I could to be like but that being said, it's like either mind power everybody or don't. I don't know. It's just like, how do you decide?
Yeah.
And then what is the point of the billboard? Why is the billboard the conduit for his, like, why is the smoking billboard the conduit?
So there's a meta reason for that. And because you also referenced the other thing. So the Shadow had a lot of advertisements in the radio show. And because this is like old men being like, don't you remember like all these things about the Shadow, the radio show? One of the things they made fun of is like that there were the Camel cigarettes, which is why they have the llama cigarette ad in there.
Okay.
And then the Brooks Brothers ad is also supposed to, or like the Brooks Brothers like moment is like a weird break that's supposed to be a reference to those kind of advertisements of the time. Because if you cut out those lines, like it works, just the scene continues. It's just like a weird, like, and then back to the script.
It's basically an Easter egg.
Part of why I like Shiwan Khan as a villain, and I talked about this in our Three Ninjas episode of Let's Rewatch too, is I love villains that know they're villains. I know everyone's like a good villain thinks they're the hero or something. I love villains that know they're villains and they're just having a good time. And another example is like that fucking floor at the end of the climax. Why does he have that like tilt-a-whirl floor?
Because it's fun. Because it's fun.
Yes.
He's a
Thank
villain.
you, Sam.
Oh
Yes.
yeah. Honestly,
you,
I
Sam.
really enjoyed that floor. That would be one of the positives of this film for me. I was just like, oh yeah, like upping the ante. You're like, you thought you could walk over to my throne? No, you can't. Let's test your balance.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, you're gonna fall? Yes, you are. Flat on your face. I
mean, if I was a crazy villain, I would totally do stuff like that, right? Like, you gotta. Like, why not? Like,
absolutely. Why not embrace chaos? I mean, if you're going to be evil anyway. This is all of my theories out there. There's another writing inconsistency with powers, and it has to do with Margot Lane, where, like, she's got this power, and it's, not super, strong, but she can kind of, like, sense what people are thinking, specifically the Shadow, and she's kind of sometimes hears things that are going on in people's brains. And the first time Alec Baldwin kind of tries to make her forget because he's like, oh, she's gonna be bad for me, it's like the Shadow ability doesn't work on her, like mind control doesn't work on her. But then when Shiwan Khan uses it, it does for a time. So I was like, is he stronger? Like, I was like, are they implying that he's stronger? Like, and that's why it works? Because she, goes all the way to, basically Alec Baldwin's apartment, goes to, Lamar's apartment to, murder him and then snaps out of it while she's there. But, it's not, drawn out enough, implicit enough for me, and it just feels like inconsistency rather than You know, like, it's not like, oh my God. Like, there's no, I feel like there needed to be a line where he was just like, he was able to do that to you or something, just to make it clear that there is clearly like a power imbalance where to make this villain like a real challenge for the Shadow, you know, because he's somewhat stronger.
I did not ever.
Yeah, that's how I took it. And we see plenty of evidence that he is stronger. Because very shortly after that, there's a whole like, I can't believe he did it. I can't believe he has the power bit with like hiding the building. But yeah, it would be nice if they actually were a little bit more specific about that.
I think just like along the way, because I think like one of the things about this film is for me, I just found like the middle of it pretty boring. And I actually fell asleep on it like 40 minutes in. And then I had to like go back, rewind, rewatch it, like, you know. And I think part of it is that because there is inconsistent writing in that middle, there is like no buildup. And I feel like that would have helped with the buildup to kind of like, you know, kind of build this tension of like, this person really is stronger than him, and you don't really get that confirmation to almost like the end, like towards the final battle. And it's, you know, I mean, it's great. The building's really cool. I really like the design of it, but but I feel like that to me is kind of like a negative. Like I feel like it kind of like, I don't think that the pacing is bad. I just feel like the writing itself kind of drags along.
I love the set design. I think I love the building hotel internally. I love the Cobalt Club. I just love that. I love that aesthetic. I think it looks cool. But yes,
all of it's really beautiful.
You just have the pieces, and that's why I want to do this. It's like all the pieces are here. You arrange them shittily, though. We need to rearrange. Like you have good pieces.
And make the weirdest fucking choices.
Yes.
So weird. So weird.
What is that next time you can be on top joke? What he like?
Oh, it's so bad. There's an article about that line being so terrible.
I mean, honestly, the scene where like they wake up, like, okay, so I thought like the nightmare he had was actually pretty cool, right? So like he has that nightmare and he like goes to the mirror and he feels like weird and then he rips off his face and underneath it's Shiwan Khan. It's like, that's cool because there is a moment of like, am I actually him, right? We've come from the same place. We have the same darkness. Am I him? It's the eternal question of all vigilantes, right? Am I truly evil? Do I work too much outside of the law? But then like the scene after where he's asking her about her dream and she's like building up her dream as if like, you know, to arouse him. Like, and then I was on the beach and the sun was touching my naked body. And he's doing like his like Alec Baldwin ooh faces, which I just like, and then she's like, what about you? What did you dream about? He's like, I ripped my face off. And I was just dying. I was like, I don't know if I hate this scene or I love this scene. I can't decide.
Yeah, I loved it because I was like, that scene, my writing style, that is like, he said, I ripped my face off. And she's like, that's weird or whatever. Like, that's, I personally, I'm in the, I loved it camp.
I enjoyed that.
I had such mixed feelings. Like, I was like, I don't know if I love this or hate this, but it definitely did get a laugh out of me. So maybe it is an enjoyable moment of the film.
Yeah, I just find it so amazing because I think, Sam, you're right that it's easy to kind of zone out of this movie and even like fall asleep. There aren't a lot of good action beats in this movie, and part of that is the problem of the Shadow. Just like his power is that you don't see him, so like how do you make an action scene with him that interesting? But I do find it frustrating that Russell Mulcahy, director of Highlander 1, would have such a hard time making interesting scenes occur. But then I also remember it's Russell Mulcahy, director of Highlander 2, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that also makes sense.
The quickening.
Like,
yeah. It's the one you're going to do. You guys are doing that after this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's actually on the docket.
I'm actually so excited for that one. I can't wait. I mean, honestly, there should have only been one, but you know.
I mean, this is the summer of Mulcahy for this podcast. But seriously, like, it's so weird that this movie lacks really interesting conflicts. And I think part of that is that they really want to do some of this sort of like invisibility stuff. Like there are spots where I really like the trickery that they do. I kind of enjoy like the scene where he gets like pinned to the wall and he sort of works his way out. Like it could be kind of hokey, but there's like a good like drum beat as he sort of like pulls himself into reality. I thought that was mostly fine. There was like the spot where like Tim Curry fires off a bunch of shots and like you clearly can see where the shot where it didn't just hit the wall. Yeah. Like that was a cool bit right there. But then like there's an okay bit at the opening, like what I think should be the cold opening where they're on the bridge and he just sort of like appears and punches people and little bits like that. But like at the end of the movie, when like the Mongol horde goes to fight him, never happens. They just disappear. They leave and they are never seen again. Yeah,
the three. It's like Tim Curry and the three guys, and he sends them off, and we never see them. I was gonna bring that. I was like, I watched this movie twice, and I just realized, does anything happen to them? And I was gonna ask, did I miss it? Yeah.
I miss because they're not very smart. Like they're loyal, but they're just not smart. They got lost in the building, guys.
Well, like the thing I find frustrating because I can't speak.
I'm sorry.
It's just it's really bad. It's really bad.
I just keep making fun of all. Like I'm just like I'm enjoying this episode at least of Another Past.
So, like, the way the Shadow's powers work is hypnotism. It's not, he doesn't actually go invisible. So, I think that they are a little too into, like, we're going to do cool invisibility tricks as an effort to sort of, like, consolidate elements of, like, the radio show with the Pulp Fiction stuff where he's, like, very good at hiding versus, like, very, like, he can be in the room and you just can't see him kind of stuff. It would have been cool if we got stuff where, like, we, the audience, could see the invisible stuff and people were not reacting to it. Because like, I think that's really more how it would work. Like the idea that you just like the Westworld doesn't look like anything to me kind of situation, like where people, the building, the hotel, like, yeah, sure. Like have it be invisible when he's looking at it, but then have other, like when he walks away, have it be right behind him. Like when he's in a room with people, you could definitely have times where he's just there. Or what would be really great is have a spot where someone takes a picture and we get to see the actual picture shows him in like the Shadow outfit when the audience didn't get that kind of scene. Like we should have things like that to sort of make the moments more dynamic. Like if the whole thing is that like he's not good enough to hide his shadow from people, like while he's like clouding their minds, like having moments where there's a lot of light in the room and so you can kind of pinpoint him because there's two shadows going off. Like they should have done things like that to sort of make his powers visually dynamic, because the problem of taking on a superhero who you can't see is how do you make him look interesting? Yeah.
I mean, I think that like in the first half of the movie, especially when like the first time he talks to his uncle, and they're having that conversation, and the uncle's like, I'm gonna, send, I'm gonna put a bulletin out on the Shadow guy. He's gone too far this time. And the lighting changes to put like basically his face in shadow as he goes into his hypnotism. I thought that was pretty good. Like I thought it was like, oh, it's like that gives the audience a visual cue. Like now he is the Shadow and he's, doing his thing. I thought that was good, but there's only so many times you can use that, in the film. Like you don't want to outplay that. So I think you're right. Like it needs a little more visual, it needs to be a little more visually dynamic with how they express the, his powers.
Yeah. I do like I like the context that they use for both him and Shawan Khan. Like I think those are both, they look cool enough. Like I think they get across the vibe of what they're trying to do in those moments. And the lighting effects there are actually pretty good because we haven't done pros.
Well, I feel like we're throwing in a couple of pros.
Throwing in a couple, but there's a few things I want to talk about because, like, we haven't really talked about Tim Curry. We haven't really talked about Peter Boyle.
I love how Tim Curry died.
Yeah, Tim Curry, Peter Boyle, perfect. Don't change a fucking thing.
No, he was amazing.
When he mouths the shadow code words while the shadow is explaining it to the other guy.
Yes.
Like, I'm like, that's perfect. Every moment with Peter Boyle on screen is fucking gold.
I love when he and Miss Lane are standing outside and they're in the rain, just like with umbrellas. And he turns to her and he's like, you know what I really love about this job? The excitement. And they're like nowhere near the action.
Yes. I wrote, Peter Boyle, every scene Peter Boyle's in, everything, every headline of his, don't change it. It's like, it is locked in. Don't change
in fact,
a thing.
I would say more Peter Boyle.
Yes. I do love the aesthetic of like so many people being like, oh, I'm helping this like vigilante. I'm in on something. And he's just like, fuck, okay. I just want to have like an evening with my wife. But okay, fine. I'll fucking do your bullshit. I just
He's
love his,
like that
his
with
vibe.
all the other people too. He's just like, yeah. No. You don't know who he is. Please go away. Yes. We'll contact you. Let me get back in my cab. I need to get home. I've got a program to watch. That's his attitude. I love it.
Yes. Tim Curry. That turn at the end. I mean, he's great, and he's just Tim Curry's the fuck out of this. But
well, I think Case and I have talked about this before, possibly on air here on this podcast. Tim Curry is one of those actors that was like in almost every single movie of our childhood. He was just everywhere, like at all times. Like you just turn around and there was like Tim Curry doing a small part, Tim Curry doing a large part, Tim Curry dressed up like this. And so I feel like no matter what, the nostalgia factor will always come into play, where like even if Tim Curry is the most Tim Curry and doesn't fit the role, you're still like, oh, it's Tim Curry. I love Tim Curry.
I have a firmly of a certain generation. We'll call it millennials. I'm a geriatric millennial, apparently.
Oh, I am
according
too.
to recent
Don't
news.
worry.
Okay.
I actually embrace it because my back feels pretty geriatric, so I'm fine with the label.
I mean, I'll get real vulnerable here on a podcast in public and say I am 36, and because of 20 years of I played football from 5th grade through college and like powerlifted for like 20 years, I'm 36 and I have osteoarthritis in my hip. So yeah. I'll wear that geriatric. I earned that.
Just for all you younger people, just so you know, sports can mess up your body long after you're done playing them.
Mm-hmm. But I feel like our generation, we all have at least one, if not like one or two movies that are like, I adore that movie, and it's Tim Curry's in them. I guarantee it. Like, and for me, it's Home Alone 2 and Clue. Are my two favorite.
I love Clue.
That Clue's perfection.
It's so good. Yeah.
But yeah, he was. I'm just looking at his credits right now in this era, and holy shit, that guy worked in the 80s and 90s, especially the early 90s.
Oh yeah. In this movie, like I wanted him and Ian McKellen just like shooting the shit, and they didn't do enough of that. I'm mad.
Agreed.
That was a trivia thing I found when we did Curry chose this movie because he wanted to work with Ian McKellen. That was why he accepted this role.
And who wouldn't make that choice? Like the prospect of an Ian McKellen Tim Curry duo is great, but like they don't use Ian McKellen enough. And again, I was saying like, yeah, he wasn't that well known, but like also as a role, they don't use him enough. Like he's like, because once Khan manipulates his brain, he becomes like a Renfield to him. It's like a little weird that he isn't actually around, like dramatically helping him more. Yeah. Which is a strange choice.
1000%. And especially since he's such a strong, like a important asset to Khan, like Khan needs, like you would think that he'd want to keep him closer. I don't know. I guess
both of them, frankly.
Yeah.
And like I like the scene where the shadow confronts Curry, like in that weird workshop water place thing. Yeah. Like I thought the music worked pretty well. I actually thought it was kind of clever the way like Curry like looked for where the splashes were in the water. I thought the effect didn't look great. I would have rather it been like ripples of water, because again, he's not actually invisible. But I thought like the use of shooting at the wall and seeing where the actual gunfire was a good choice. The music was pretty good when he's like shouting about how he'll be a king in the new world. I thought that was a good delivery for that kind of a like a second tier villain, like that kind of a lieutenant villain. I thought worked really well right there. And he knew he can't beat the Shadow in a fight because he can't see him. So he just locks him in a room and fills it with water. Good choices. Wish there was more of that.
Fun factoid.
Like, there aren't that's just the thing. There aren't that many action scenes for a character that walks around holding two guns.
Yeah, I just want to put a little money where our mouth is as far as how prolific he was in a 10-year span from 84 to 94. He has 54 IMDb credits.
Jesus Christ,
that's amazing. See, and that's why no matter what, anyone who was alive and watching movies during that time, you've got at least something. You've got at least, for me, it's Clue and Legend and like Rocky Horror Picture Show. Those are like my three like go-to Curry performances.
Oh shit! Have you guys done Rocky Horror on Let's Rewatch?
We have not.
Oh man, that's a good, interesting one to talk about. Taking notes for when you come back from paternity leave.
Yeah.
So you can do the time warp again?
Yes. This is not necessarily good because there's a big bad that I'm about to bring up, but it's also kind of good. So I like the costume of the Shadow. I think that like the trench coat and the scarf that he wears around his face and the hat, those are fucking perfect. I think that like they nail what is honestly an easy costume to make look good on screen. Like they nail it really well. Like the guns look pretty good. I don't think he doesn't use them very well, but the guns actually look, they're silver and they're like, it's awesome.
I'm sure all of us in our pitch have the same thing is the nose. Yes. Okay. What you're saying, the nose.
Yeah.
It's just cover his face with the bandana, right? Just cover his face with the red scarf and it looks great.
Yeah. Even if you have to have the nose go over it, have Alec Baldwin's nose. I understand in the lore that they don't explain in this and doesn't exist in other adaptations that he's clouding men's minds so he looks different. Except that's dumb because there's no point where he would ever be doing that where he couldn't just be invisible. Or
just have his face covered.
Yes, his face is covered. And then it's the worst ADR every time he's like talking because like they don't have his exposed mouth to like catch on the mic. So they ADR all those lines, which makes people really curious if it's one of his brothers playing the part. And no one is sure which, because people are like, is it Stephen Baldwin? Is it Billy Baldwin? None of them look like Alec. Like that's the weird part here. Like why, besides just making it like over the top look like the Pulp Fiction, like this like caricaturized, like big nosed character, like why do it? Like his face looked enough like it would have been fine.
Yeah, I think it was like they were just trying like, this is what it looked like in the pulp. This is what it looked like in the pulps when I was a kid. So we're going to make it look this way. And it's like, I agree with you. If they just taken the red scarf and have it cover from eyes down, like just below eyes down, and had just like tied tight. So covering it, I think it would look fucking cool, man. Like that outfit.
Yeah.
And
we know it looks cool because at the end of the movie, when he's not doing the face thing and he doesn't have his hat on, he's got the rest of the outfit though.
Yeah.
And he looks really cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was upset that he didn't have the hat on though, because I thought that the hat really pulled that ensemble together. And
yeah, no, it totally does. That's why Darkwing Duck looks just like him. Like,
yeah.
No, he would look like this. He looks like this cool noir gunslinger if he doesn't have that dork ass like nose hanging over his. And I don't know if the three of us maybe we're having an extra visceral reaction to it since the last 16 months. We've been looking at people with their nose hanging out of their necks like, you fucking asshole. What are you doing?
I was thinking that though.
Like maybe
you are not protecting yourself or others.
Yeah.
You jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How
I can't breathe with my nose.
Yeah. And maybe that's coloring all of our reactions to it.
It's just like,
no, but it always looked dumb.
But it's like just I actually like looked at some before I watched the movie. I looked at some old like critics like write-ups in newspapers. Like I just looked them up, and like a lot of people were like, I don't understand the prosthetic. Like a lot of movie reviewers were like, it was unnecessary. So it's not just us. Like in 1994, people felt like that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And what's sad is because it
And then
would
the
have
other
looked
thing is the cape.
cool with it covered.
Well, again, even without the prosthetic and having the nose exposed would have been fine. The cape. I know that it's a part of the classic look. I don't think it looks very good on screen, and especially not a big CGI cape like the fucking Spawn movie. Like every time it's there, I'm like, wouldn't he be cooler with it like much more streamlined and just wearing that cool ass like duster?
I don't know if I appreciate that tone which you said, that fucking Spawn movie. Okay, I'm an apologist for the 90s Michael J. White, John Leguizamo Spawn movie.
I'm just talking about the capes.
Okay.
I feel like I've walked into a fight that we're arguing
Sam,
about the shadow, guys. We are arguing
Sam,
about
would you
the
excuse
shadow.
us for a second? Yeah.
Stay on track. Stay on track, okay? Listen.
The only good adaptation was the HBO animated series. It had Keith David as the voice of Spawn.
I mean, his death was great. I mean,
But it was a really good death. Like, honestly, like, it was so good. He was like, there's your exit.
Yeah, that was good. I've mentioned this before. I like the soundtrack in general. It is very derivative of the Danny Elfman Batman score. Like, it sounds a lot like it. But I think it actually sounds pretty good. The scenes where it needs to have, like, good beats, it has actually really strong, like, brass and drum lines. Like, I'm actually very happy with all of that.
Yeah. I thought it suited the film really well, and I think it served the film, and I think that's the most important part. Like, even if it may sound like something else and kind of, like, you know, bring that to mind, I think in general, like, the soundtrack served the action well and the emotion when there were emotions on screen there.
Yeah. I mean,
But I do have a question for you guys.
Okay.
Did you check out the music video for the song they play at the credits?
No.
The official tie-in music video.
I mean, the song's ridiculous.
The song is so ridiculous.
Tune into the Let's Rewatch episode of this movie, The Shadow, to hear me sing part of that song.
Please do. Yeah, that as it was playing, I was like, what are these lyrics? What? Now I have to go look up the video. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, it's so on the nose, and then the music video has like dancers, but then intercut with footage from the movie. It's so weird.
I love that era. It's like that 10-year block of music videos from movies where it's like, I'm going to have the band or the singers in some kind of set piece singing directly at the camera, but then intersperse like actual scenes from the movie in there. Well, it's just...
Yeah. Because sometimes you get gold. Sometimes you get Men in Black or even Wild Wild West, which,
I mean, those are
for everything wrong with that movie.
Yeah, that music video in that song is great.
Number.
Yeah, it can't be touched. But then you get things like where it's like... I don't know why this song has been stuck in my head for my entire life, but the Celine Dion song from whatever it was, that Michelle Pfeiffer movie where she's like a reporter.
And I know what you're talking about.
Yes, okay, and she's like sitting in a room in the music video full of TVs. It's like,
yes,
you were my strength when I was weak. You saw the best there was in me.
You son of a bitch.
Yeah,
I couldn't reach. Yeah, I'm everything
because you loves me. Oh my god, it's true. I mean, even like what was that song, the Prince of Thieves song with Everything I Do for You. That video was also similar, right?
Oh yeah,
it's just like cuts of the movie.
So the last thing before we shift gears, I just want to call out, I love actually how much the Shadow drinks, like how much everyone drinks, but like every time he's at the club, they drop off like multiple martinis for him, and it's definitely alcohol. It's none of this Batman shit where it's just like no, just give me ginger ale, but make it look like it's scotch. Like no,
yeah,
like
except they definitely waste. I like how when he meets Margot, he like orders for her like $1,000 bottle of wine. It's like a Rothschild, and it's like she has a glass. He's like, "Let's get out of here and go get." I just ordered you this ridiculous. Let's just go get some duck. Which there's the whole consent thing, which we haven't even talked on, which might be an issue. Because did he crave Peking duck because he could sense that she was craving Peking duck, and he's like trying to manipulate her to sleep with her? Because there's a whole consent bullshit, like problematic
That's how
issue.
I took it.
Yeah, that's a whole problem. That is not okay. Like, yeah, that's a whole we didn't touch on, but I want to make sure we call that out.
There's a lot in their relationship that's questionable, but I guess maybe eventually she can read his mind too. So
She's like, I can read your mind that you're reading my mind. Stop it.
yeah. Can you imagine arguments at home with them though?
They're just staring at each other.
Intense staring and just angry thinking.
Yeah, that weird butler walks in and it's like, oh god.
You can't storm out from those arguments because you're still going to hear their thoughts across the house.
They'll still know the whole time. He'll have to like leave, go to another hotel room.
It's like, you better take the jet out to LA or something because I don't want to hear your bullshit thoughts.
The longer we're together, the farther I can hear your thoughts. Yeah. Please, you must leave the state now.
All right. Well, so I guess here's a good spot for a real ad drop.
What? That was a real thing. Okay.
We did a whole thing. Sam and I did a whole yeah.
I can't believe that's not
you know
real.
What? Hang on. And now a word from our sponsor.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't screen beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential screen beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? But that's not...
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans!
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
Because you're all Screen Beans now.
You will be mine. Aurora.
And we're back.
Let's do pitches.
Yeah, let's do pitches.
Pitches! Wait, mine sounded too much like the other word. Sorry. Pitches!
You can say that, Sam.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Depends on the context. We can get away with it in certain ways.
Yeah, if you were dog breeders.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pitch me your breed.
King's Charles Spaniel. I just saw a picture of one. That's the other reason why it's in my head.
So anyway, like a really crass dog breeder. Like, so I had this German Shepherd. Fuck this. Yellow lab.
She was just such a beautiful bitch, you know, like just the most beautiful bitch you've ever seen. Just ready for him, you know? Please do not. Please cut all of this out, man.
Don't you fucking dare, man.
I'm so punchy after a day of work. Sorry.
All right, so Pat, you are the one who brought this movie as a suggestion. It was kind of like on our radar anyway, and like this summer, I feel like it's just a thing a lot of people want to talk about. Like, I feel like a lot of shows have brought it up. It's having that moment, and you had that moment over on Let's Rewatch, and then we're like, hey, I need to do this movie over here. Yeah. And I said, okay, cool, let's do it. So since you're the guest, would you like to take the first crack?
Sure. I will. I do not want to go after Case. I'll say, Sam, if you have like I need to get this out, I will, if you want to go, but I just don't want to go after Case.
It's okay. I actually told Case he's not allowed to go before me, so he usually goes last now.
Okay.
That's true. He's referencing when we did Legend and I brought slides.
Put it this way, I'm working with Case. I'm trying to get Case to do some stuff. I'm a professional writer. It is my job, and I don't want to go after Case.
Yeah, no, Case is just very thorough, and it just always sounds really good, and it sounds really thought out, and I feel like I don't sound that thought out. Like, I like my pitches, but I don't. I think that his are always more detailed than mine, so he's not allowed to go first anymore.
Okay, so my pitch. I feel like my first 2 points are going to be pretty universal across the board, and that's fine. I think we're all on the same page because we all have good taste. We're fixing the whole mask situation with his outfit, right? Like, we're going to cover that. Simple fix. It's going to be the red scarf covering his nose and mouth. But I'm cutting the opening scene completely. Or, put it this way, not completely, because I'm cutting the opening scene. We are cold opening on the bridge scene with the mobsters and the professor in the concrete shoes. Okay, and that's going to play out pretty much similar as it already is going to. I think it's a much cooler introduction to the character. A big thing is I'm going to delay the reveal of his backstory of who he was before he was the Shadow quite a bit in this, but we're going to allude to it a little bit throughout. It's his dark past. Okay, and dark pasts are much more powerful when they're kind of concealed and they're like, I don't want to talk about it. So cut that scene. A lot after that, from that point on, from the bridge scene on, there's going to be some similarities. When he's sleeping in front of the fire, it's same thing. He's going to have, it's early on, he's going to have like visions, dreams of his past life as Yinko. And like, it's going to be it's not going to be super crystal clear to the audience. It's going to be that thing they do where it's just like, that dreamy haze, and it's like him like battling, and it's warriors, and he's gonna jump up and be all sweaty and exhausted, like, and he can still be like, something's coming, but he's like, I haven't thought about that in a long time. But we don't know exactly what his deal is. I say with Shiwan Khan, as I talked about, we got to pick one. Like, what is he? I have idea. He is a descendant of Genghis Khan. He's like more close. He's been kind of trained for this though. He's not from New York. He's from the East. He's been training and getting ready and traveling the world looking for biding his time. Like, he's like, I want to finish. I want to be a conqueror. I have this like drive in me. And what he is doing is that's how he gets into New York. He ships himself in the sarcophagus, but I have this idea of, because we didn't talk about it when we were dunking on the movie, is where did those soldiers come from? Where did his henchmen come from?
I'm like, how did they get there? He shipped himself, but did he ship everyone else?
So that's what I want to do. Is these are like ghost warriors or something that he has like shipped in artifacts with him to New York. Okay. So he ships them to New York, and he like, it's almost like kind of, I know it's Chinese, not Mongolian, but like similar to like the Terracotta Warriors. I know different country, but somewhat similar. He has shipped them, and they're not modern people. He is like resurrecting them or using like some kind of fell power. And he arrives in New York. And then he gets out. You have the museum scene. He gets out of there. He resurrects his like core group of like honor guard. He's drawn to Lamont. He didn't come to see him, but he's drawn to him because there's like a connection. Okay, they have like a psychic case. You're welcome to jump in here. I like these to be dialogues, but he has a connection to him. He like feels him, senses him.
Well, it's freaking me out because like we're really similar in a lot of ways. Like not the Terracotta Warriors, but like
no, I wouldn't. I didn't write that down, but I'm like he is like bringing his army there. He senses him. He doesn't know who he is. He just senses this presence that he has a connection to. He starts to so Shiwan Khan doesn't know who he is exactly, and we don't know what Alec Baldwin's backstory is yet. Okay, so keep that in mind. He goes and sees him like he does when they first meet in his lair. He's like, how'd you find me? He tells Alec Baldwin the story. He's like, I once heard about this this white man from the West who led a band of warriors and was for 7 years was one of the most brutal warlords over this province. You don't know it, and kind of alluding to, you don't know anything about that. His name was Yin Ko. And it's kind of like, it's almost like he's learning. It's like, oh, you're Yin Ko. I didn't know that, but that's cool. I'm interested in that. And Alec Baldwin is upset because he's been trying to suppress that and not like have that come back up. And he has to. Part of this is I want Alec Baldwin to like have her, and I'll get to that. And when I get to his journey to become the Shadow is slightly tweaked in my version, where I'll just cut ahead when he reveals it. He has PTSD from World War I. He was traveling the world just trying to numb his pain, and he kind of fell into this thing, and he was kind of like zonked out, drugged up, and then he was a soldier. So he started, and he just kind of fell into this. When he was over there, he was just traveling the world. He's like, I was looking for anything to find release, find comfort, find some kind of, whether I was looking for something to either kill me or set me free or find me something. And he kind of fell into this role. And I'll get to that in a second. But the other thing I want to address is like the mind control powers, because they're all over the place, right? What they can do, how they work. I like and I love putting like limitations on things like that or challenges for people to overcome. So I like the idea of they both have this similar ability to cloud people's minds or influence people's minds or kind of control them. I like this idea of when one of them, if they're in somewhat proximity, if one of them is using it, the other knows. It's like a radar ping, right? It's like, I can feel it. I can sense it. You're doing this. So it makes them have to be really judicial about how they use that. Because it's like,
I like that. Yeah. It's like Cerebro or something.
Oh, Cerebro's going to come back into play here in a second. It's really funny you say that, Case. Okay.
What? Pat and me being on the same wavelength? That's so weird. Who would ever think?
So we're going to get to that. So Khan is fascinated by him, and he's like, and he's kind of tailing him or observing him. And I like the idea of when he shows up, he's got a very like robes, beard, but he kind of like adopts Lamont's style. Like that scene when they're in the restaurant, I love that when he's in the suit, except I want him clean shaven at that point. I want him like, I've clean shaven. I'm like adopting your style. I'm stealing your style. I like it for myself. I want him to be a little more, and we talked about it a little bit for a moment, Sam, we like alluded to that, is I want him to get a little more like polished in a Western sense, right? Because polished is subjective. But I'm saying I want him to like, ooh, I like this. I'm going to kind of adopt this. And then he kind of goes, he's wearing the suit, he's clean shaven. So he's fascinated by Lamont. He follows him. He sees him with Margot. And he's also there. He knows she's Reinhardt's daughter. So he mind controls both. I like that he shows up at the lab. He mind controls Margot and Reinhardt. They're together. By the way, they say it one time in case I'm confusing anyone. Reinhardt is Ian McKellen's first name. This character in this movie, he's the scientist. He mind controls both of them, knowing it will ping Alec Baldwin. Okay. And he's doing one of two things. He's having Reinhardt have his device and leave, but he leaves Margot behind with the instructions to kill the Shadow when the Shadow's up, knowing the Shadow's going to come. Instead of find the Shadow, kill the Shadow. That is very convoluted to me. What was like, why does he mind control in the current iteration? There's no reason why he mind controls Margot and has her find the Shadow, kill the Shadow. In this, it just so happens this person I'm trying to meet and there's a connection, a through line. It's you and Margot. If I use this power, he's going to hear it or feel it and come. I'm setting a trap. Okay. And she's the trap. It doesn't work, of course. She doesn't succeed to kill him. And then you have that a similar scene, right? When she shakes out of it and like, oh, you're the Shadow. His plan, by the way, is not a bomb. Because it's so like, then
Agreed.
What? For me, it's like, well, then what? It's not a bomb. Then what? So Case, what you said, what Reinhardt and Tim Curry's character have built for him is essentially a Cerebro. It isn't.
Oh my God.
Oh, are we the same?
This is my pitch.
It's all of us.
But it's,
it amplifies his mind control.
Yes.
Because here's the fun thing, guys. I did some homework on this. You're gonna love this. You all are gonna love this. We're all gonna like go crazy here.
Oh my God.
If he's trying to conquer the world, okay, what do conquerors need? An army, usually, right? Guess what the largest city in the world was from 1925 to 1950?
Was it a center of villainy?
I'm saying New York was the largest city in the world.
The center of villainy.
Oh no! Yeah. The center of all the wretched hive of scum and villainy that was New York, of course, right? Yes, it just so happens in the era this movie is set, New York is the largest city based on population in the world. So imagine he is going to Cerebro it and create an army 10 million strong. 10 times larger than the largest current standing army in the world of that time.
Yeah.
Is his plan instead of blowing it up. Every single person of New York is now his thrall. So that's what the device is going to do. So when he meets Khan at the restaurant, okay, Khan is in a suit like he is, but he's clean shaven. He's like, I'm adopting this like aesthetic. I like it. It's fun for me. All right. This is where, what are we going to do with this fucking knife? Right. Because I'm going to say we haven't seen the knife yet. He reveals the knife like he does here. And then that's a huge trigger for Alec Baldwin. It's like, how can you control that? And there's like maybe a brief flash in his brain. Maybe we don't even see it at this point. But all we know is he sees that knife and Alec Baldwin is shook. Lamont is shook. Like, what the fuck? How do you have that knife under your ability? I want him to get out of that situation kind of not as dominant as that. How that resolves is he like convinces the one guard to give him his gun and Khan fucking runs away, which by the way, Khan runs away like 3 times in this movie. Once his like plan A fails and like whatever his henchman gets beat, he like just he like swarms away. It's like this time, and then at the finale he like tries to run away. I want it to be kind of flipped where Lamont has to like barely escape from this, and then he's questioning like, holy shit, can I beat this guy? We don't know, but all we know is he's shook from seeing that knife, right? He's like, what do I do? How does he kind of mastery of this? Margot's at his house. You kind of leave that first night she's at his house the same. I dig it. That's what the dream, right? The prosthetics are great. The effects are great when he's digging into his skin and everything like that. Like, kind of leave that as is. And then you have him go to the big sphere, Tim Curry. I want Tim Curry to have like an escort, like guards, and the Shadow beats the shit out of the guards. And Tim Curry is putting on an act like, oh my God, thank you. They had accosted me and they were forcing me to work for them. He gets too close to him and Tim Curry like stabs him or something, where he's putting on an act where he's like, because I like the idea of he's willingly a participant because he wants power and riches and everything, but it's such a weird, the way they shoot it and the way they do it is just kind of weird and feels like awkward to me currently, where it's just like he just reveals to this like floating voice like, I've been in on it, I'm gonna shoot and I'm gonna turn on this water. Whereas I feel like what would be more authentic is he's got these guards, Shadow shows up, the guards are getting beat up, and like his mind, like his like weaselly mind is like, oh, I'm gonna put on an act. I'm gonna be like, oh my God, I'm this unwilling victim, and they were forcing me to work for them. And the Shadow comes up near, as soon as he gets within arm reach, he's like, boom, knife to the gut or something like that. And then he runs off, locks him in the room. Margot has to come save him using her psychic ability. So then they have this downtime together, right? Lamont and Margot at his mansion. And when he kind of like convalesces from his wound, and this is when he does the full reveal of his past. He had PTSD from World War One, because they mentioned it. He's a veteran of World War One. It's like a passing comment. He traveled the world. He fell into this whole thing of like joining this cartel, and then he eventually he just was like, I just didn't want to feel anything. And I just did, and there's like flashbacks of him like leading raiding parties and wars, and then maybe he has like a really bad moment, right, where it's like, before I had a moment of clarity where I was like, what have I become? Or like they raided a village of like innocent people. And he voluntarily leaves. Because that's the thing is I don't like that he's like forced into this, right? It's weird. Because there's no moment of like, I want to do good. It's no, you're a piece of shit. We're going to make you do good. And there's no him accepting that, right? It's just like, okay. So it's like,
I guess I'm gonna, 'cause that night.
Yes. So it's kind of like he wanders like the desert of like in like China, and he falls dehydrated at this temple, and they bring him in and they give him and they see in him like the means to do good in the world. And he reveals this to Margot, and he reveals it in a sense of like, I'm a shitty person. I have a ton of shame about this. And I do what I do now because for 7 years I was a total piece of shit and like awful on the world. And I'm trying to make that right. And then then they have their kind of intimate moment. They can like kiss. It doesn't have to be that, you know what I mean? Like kiss. I like the idea of like the kiss. She falls asleep in his arms. He like carries her to her bed, sleeps on the couch or something like that. And then like love the whole torn down building ruse thing, right? It looks like an empty lot. Dig that. Keep that. It works really well. We already talked about it. I have my note here. Not changing a thing about Peter Boyle. He's fucking perfect. Oh, okay. So about the floor thing at the climax, I had this bit of like when he's doing his backstory reveal to Margot in like the flashback, his training as Shadow, maybe there's like a tilting floor in the temple or something like that. Because they would explain like why Khan has it. Because again, there's no fucking reason why Khan had that put in.
Chaos. Chaos is the reason.
But I like the idea of perhaps it's like a recreation of something from the Tulku's Tulku's temple. I've had like 6 cocktails.
No excuses.
Like, I like that as being a reference to that experience, right? Like it's something in the training.
Yeah.
And yeah, like a platform that balances or something. Like it's like it's like pivots off the center or something like that.
Yes. So that at least there's an explanation for why that exists. And then my last big thing I want to tweak in this is the final confrontation. I think is weak as hell, where it's like just Khan running and then they have the weird mirror thing. And we
forgot to talk about that one actually. There was an earthquake that destroyed their set.
What's that?
Which is why there was an earthquake that destroyed their set. Which is why they basically just like cut to the end after like being there initially.
Weird. Interesting.
So for me, it's like they need to have some kind of straight up fight, and we could do one of two things. You could do the straight up sword fight, but I like the idea of like the dagger coming into play, and it's like they're both are like trying to control it, and it kind of is like hopping back and forth between them, like who's mastering it. And then I also like the idea of they're doing this like close quarters gun combat. So they allude to it when they're in the restaurant. They both shoot at each other, and the bullets hit each other, right? And they just drop.
Yeah.
So they both have this like mind clouding, mind reading ability. Imagine if they both had like pistols and they were really close range with each other within arm's reach, and they keep trying to like shoot each other, but they both can kind of with their minds see the person's movement coming. So they're just barely dodging it or smacking the gun out of the way. And it's just like they each empty a clip at super close range and they're barely missing each other because they can see each other's move seconds, like a half a second before they're doing it. That could be a really cool choreography moment.
I mean, I have basically similar thoughts, but what we are saying is that we should have gun kata.
What's that?
From like Equilibrium, like the whole like the gun martial art.
Sorry, blind spot. Oh wait, I feel like I've seen that. Is that a Christian Bale movie?
With Christian Bale?
Yeah.
I think I've seen that one time. Maybe I'm subconsciously pulling that up. Yeah. But this would have been way before.
I mean, either way, cool gunplay is what we're saying.
My point is they need to have more of a direct. You said there was issues, but they need. I don't care what happens. They needed to have more of a direct. They're supposed to be like these like two warriors trained in the same. They're two honestly, like supernatural warriors trained in the same place. They need to have a direct conflict, like duel.
honestly, they could have done like they could have just entered like a shadow realm, which you don't necessarily need a set
Fuck
for,
yes.
like with like smoke and shit, and just had them
That's
do
so good,
head
Sam.
of like an
Yes.
on like basically like face to face like confrontation. And fuck, like I know he's like all about the guns, but like maybe we get rid of them. Maybe we do gun kata. Maybe we do part gun kata, part unarmed hand to hand combat. Like make it like, you know, a little bit of everything, scrambling to get the gun. Like actually give us like something, you know, maybe even have like their minds like get clouded. He can't see him, then he can't see him, you know, like kind of they're disappearing on each other. I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff that they could have done in a big room with just smoke. I feel like.
Yes. Yes.
Smoke and lighting.
Yeah, like if they were fighting and like we kept cutting between them and they're the only, like each one is the only one on screen and they see the shadow of the other person. Like they're actively like blocking each other from each other's sight, and like they're using visual cues of the room to sort of like pick up off of each other and like
I think you could also
go into that fight. You could do some really cool gun choreography, and at no point is either are both of them on screen.
Yeah, I think you could also do something really cool with just like sound, because like in my mind already, like I can just see one of them like on screen, and you can just kind of hear the swishing of something, and like having one of them just kind of look left, right, and then they kind of disappear and the other one appears, kind of thing. Because like there is like this like there should be like a mind. Like, I feel like this is such an anime moment for me, but I feel like it has to be, like, one of those, like, crazy-ass Dragon Ball, like anime moments where people are just, like, it's so intense that, like, even if the action is solely on their faces, it's just gonna be that intense. But, like, honestly, like, that would have been cool. Like they're in the shadow realm now. Like they've both ascended to the shadow realm, and what part of them will survive, right? Because the whole idea, sort of, although it's not really like, you know, drawn out, is that there is balance to these two men, right? That they've both known the darkest dark that you can know, but they also know, you know, what to be human, especially the shadow, right? He's got a good heart now, but he knows the darkness that lives in men. So this is a metaphorical battle, right? Like, which wolf do you feed kind of thing. So I feel like that would have been fine. It would have been cool. It would have been awesome to see, actually.
Yes, 100%.
All right, so we get the shadow gun kata fight, and how do you close it off?
I mean, I think I'm not a huge fan of the. Maybe I'm the wrong one here. Not a huge fan of the denouement with him in a sanitarium having been lobotomized. I think they would just kill him.
Also, a thing we didn't talk about, and that's because it's really fucked up. I remember as a kid being like, that's crazy because he does have psychic powers. But the fact that it's an agent of the shadow and it's not just like an accident that he was lobotomized, that it was intentional.
Yeah. It's really fucking dark.
That's so fucked up.
It's like...
It's so much worse that it's known.
Yeah, I feel like... It also makes me... Like, when I was, like, sitting there, I was just like... is he really a good guy? Because I was just like, he literally said something, like, I guess you could say, like, I guess Aang also makes sure to take away the bending ability of the Fire Lord. So it's kind of along those lines. But, and he didn't kill him, I guess, but I don't know. Like, I was just like, it just seems really messed up to keep him innocent. Like, you already took away, like, the thing that made him, right? So, like, why does he have to live locked up too?
Also, yeah, you're talking. I'm almost 100 years later. Our mental health facilities and the way we treat that still isn't great, not perfect. So that fate of being in like a sanitarium in 1930 is worse than death. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. It's.
Especially because most of them weren't actually sanitary.
Yes. Yeah, so I would probably wrap it up just saying like they have an epic fight and he defeats him, he dies. Because the Shadow has shown himself he is not Batman and that he's not afraid to. I mean, he fucking shoots people 90% of the time, so he's obviously not afraid with killing as a method of crime stopping.
Yeah, it's weird. It is weird that he chooses not to kill this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get that there's a brick joke here because earlier he's like, I know a great therapist, and he gives the name, or a great psychiatrist, and he gives the name, and it's the name that gets signed off on the guy's log at the end. Just to emphasize on top of the fact that he has the red ring that he's an agent of the Shadow.
Yeah.
So I know that it's a callback, but like, it's so weird that they just fucking cut out a chunk of his brain and leave him in jail effectively at the end. Like, when he's already murdered all the other people. And this is by far the most dangerous person, even without his powers.
I mean, he literally convinced Tim Curry to jump out a window to his death.
Yeah. That's... Lots of that is very much on point.
Are we going to just repeat each other? Are we just gonna... I looked at
picture this. Terracotta Warriors.
I feel like Pat's version is just the version. That's it, guys. That's our show. It's done.
Okay.
I mean, I will say that like the only other thing that I thought, and I don't think that it would actually work, but I was thinking that if the if we were to keep the bomb, then I would kind of change Shiwon Khan's like motivation, which I kind of played with a little bit, and I kind of played with the thought of him like not coming to take over the world and not coming to court the Shadow, but coming to end the Shadow, and kind of like just this like thought of like an imperialist invader kind of thing, like coming to take revenge for like opium dens and things like that.
Oh.
And so I did kind of do that, but I was just like, I wasn't sure. That was like, I wasn't sure how to work all the other elements I would like. And also that gave me pause into figuring out whether I really felt the Shadow would be the good guy or the bad guy then. And so there was like far too many questions for me to make that my official pitch, which is why my pitch was more like Pat's. But I did play with that idea where like, it was like, like, let's say instead of like, because I feel like what fits best, right, is for him to make a machine that would extend his ability to control all these minds, right? Because that's really what these two men have going for them, right? But I was like, but what if, because I kept, when I was watching the movie, I kept rewinding the movie, I kept going, but why a bomb? Like, I don't understand why a bomb? Like, and so I was just like, I feel like if you're gonna do the bomb, which I understand, right? There's like this feeling of dread when you think of something blowing up. So I feel like on the most basic level, again, when they went and picked out of the hat in the writer's room, whoever was writing the script, and they were like, what am I going to do? What is he going to set up? Oh, a bomb. Okay, so we're just going to get a physicist. Cool.
Well, I think there's an impulse when you're writing a thing that's set in an earlier time period and is adapting a work from sort of that time period to try to be clever and insert a real thing. Like we see that also in like Sherlock Holmes, like the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies where it's like, oh, we're going to set off World War I prematurely. I mean, like we see that with like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I feel like there's, when you're writing those kind of things, about stuff that was set in those kind of eras. Like this is right before the atom bomb would be real. So it'd be like, can you imagine if someone came up with what we know would be like actually existing 5 years later or 10 years later? Can you imagine if that happened prematurely and it was the wrong hands? Yeah.
So I just was like, but I didn't feel like there was like a good enough reason for that particular villain to want to blow up this city. I mean, I guess you could say, like, he wants people to quake in fear of his powers, but, like, he's in the city. Like, he's still there. He didn't leave. The bomb's going to go off while he's there.
Yeah, he had a plane that he was going to take in an hour and have another hour before the bomb goes off.
Like, I was just like, what? Like, it's just, like, so poor planning. So I was just like, you know, for me, I was like, if I were going to keep the bomb, I would want to give him a motivation as to why the bomb, why there. And it would be like, because this is where the Shadow is from. this is where he is, and he's done enough damage to us, so I'm going to damage him. So that was my only thing. But again, I don't know what I would do with the knife. And I mean, the priceless shots of it wiping its own mouth as it challenges the shadow, we'd miss out on that.
What do we do with the knife?
Yeah.
Y'all.
So
Number one.
that thing was weird.
So the knife, I mean, like, so they were very happy with like the CG that they used with it, and I don't think it looks that bad.
Actually, I was
like, in
surprised
terms of-
how not like, I thought it was gonna look like 10 times more horrible. Like, I really did. Like, I was gonna be like, I'm gonna like go into this and I'm gonna look at this and it's gonna be bad. It's like when we watched Beowulf and I was just like, wow, like 3D animation's gone so much farther and now this looks like crap.
Yeah.
But like,
yeah, it's better integrated. Like,
this wasn't that bad. Like, I wasn't like struck automatically with how terrible it was.
yeah, I mean, it looks like video game art, but like, you know, metal is a little bit easier to render in CG than like
People.
fur or hair, which is what we harped on a lot on that episode.
Yeah, hair. Ugh.
Yeah, it's smooth, and they put just enough grit, you know, like enough like wear on it that it like looked relatively fine. You know, it's just, you know, it doesn't quite light right, and it's obviously like the facial animations are weird, but like it could be a lot worse, and especially because it's 1994 when this came out. You know, that's sort of it was better than it could have been. So for me,
real quick, case before I didn't want to cut Sam off. What? Do you want to know something wild? I guess it's one of those things where I find this very encouraging, like as a creator and a writer and stuff, where it's like not everything you do is gonna be amazing. Okay, you just have to accept the fact that like, if you're gonna try and do this shit professionally, you're gonna have a couple duds. There are 2 writers credited on this movie. Walter B. Gibson, who's like the character, the Shadow. You know, it's kind of like an honorary thing. He died 9 years before the movie came out. And then David Koepp. That name might not sound familiar, but he is a credited writer on Jurassic Park, the first Mission Impossible, and the first Spider-Man movie.
yeah. No, I mean, he says he wrote this before those movies came out. So even though this comes after Jurassic Park, and Carlito's Way, also just sort of throw it out like good credits that this guy has. I realize not everyone loves Carlito's Way, but this is a movie he wrote when he wanted to write movies, and like he wrote it on spec just because he liked it as a property. So it took a while for it to actually get made, but we never really talked about that.
I'm just saying, kids, if you don't follow your dreams, all right, because you know, just know you're gonna. Not everything you do is going to be gold.
Today you might write The Shadow, but tomorrow's wide open.
Jurassic Park.
But literally, he wrote Jurassic Park before this.
No, he wrote this before.
Okay,
it didn't get made.
That's just funny that Jurassic Park came out before this.
Right. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, and I totally agree with you, Pat. Like it. Don't show the opening scene like that they have in this movie. Like there, don't do it there. Put it mostly in when Margot reads his mind. That makes the most sense, right? Like I think we all agree on that one. Like that makes a ton of sense. Hypothetically, if you weren't going to do that, if you were hell bent on showing, you know, Lamont train, fucking have Khan there. Have them be rivals, and have them be rivals over the fucking knife.
I love that, like, at this point, our pitches have dissolved into hypotheticals because Pat was so good. Go on.
Well, no, so I agree. Like, if I were doing it from scratch, I would be like, yeah, so obviously, like, hold the thing for later and go with that, because, like, that made the most sense. Like, my notes are all like, yeah, this is a great cold opening. Why isn't this not the cold opening? But if you weren't going to do that and you wanted to show it, like, you know, have him show remorse, have him be really sad that he killed his like mentor guy, and then like go in and like do that. But that's not how I would honestly do it. It's just hypothetically, if you had to keep those scenes, how would you do it? Okay, cool. What I would like to do is to have the same cold opening, but I would like to not as soon as the one scientist is gone, be like, oh, yeah, all right, it's Alec Baldwin. Okay, cool. And like have him go off and be Lamont Cranston. Because what I would like to do is for a short first act, not reveal who the Shadow is. He has this whole network of people who work for him, and I would like to sort of see all of this stuff happening around, like all these people dropping off notes and like signaling, like having people with signal rings and so forth. Because it's actually kind of a cool scene when Alec Baldwin shows up at that scientist's house and they like give the codes to each other. Like that's actually kind of dope.
Yeah.
And I like moments like that where like agents of the shadow are all like kind of interacting with each other. And I would do cold open scene on the bridge. And then I would go to the museum, and as soon as the sarcophagus opens, cut away. Don't like optimally don't show what's inside. If you have to, show what's inside, and what should be inside is not a person, but is those coins that we see later, and the knife. And because we haven't seen all this stuff, and it could be in like a cool display type thing, we don't know what's going on with that. The guard, who is Neelix from Star Trek Voyager, by the way, should just be dead, and he should be stabbed. And people are like, oh my God, because that way it's obviously a murder. And then we have like all these networks of shadows people like walking around passing off notes, because they have like a cool scene where they're like passing off notes in the middle of the street going into Act 3. And I want more of that earlier, so that the shadow is this network of people communicating with each other. And then so we can skip that first scene at the club. Like that's all exposition. It's unnecessary. Unless you just want a big dump. And most of that could be saved for later anyway, and can be less awkward. You don't need his uncle being like, I've got some issues with you. It's really weird that you went missing for 7 years. And I never said anything about that because, it's like, don't trust that Margot Lane. She hears voices like the Peking ducks.
By the way, why would he know that? Because didn't she say when she read his mind, like, that hasn't happened to me, like, since my friend when I was a kid or something?
Right. Yeah. I mean, hypothetically, it could be some Sixth Sense kind of scenario, but regardless, just don't fucking have any of that. don't do any of those scenes. Like, get to the point sort of faster. Like, I want it to be like a mystery about like what's going on. So, and part of that is that we don't see Shawan Khan like do the murder at all. Like, he's not in the sarcophagus because he's already there. And in the script, it's implied he's already been there, or at least his agents have already been there. So like, it's weird that he would need to do that travel anyway. It's like overly dramatic just for the sake of having like a cool, like, big ancient sarcophagus scene. But like, he already had the hotel. It's already been like taken over and sort of like wiped from everyone's minds. Like, that's all been set up before. He's had enough time to install a moving floor. Like, don't make it confusing to the audience what's going on. Mm-hmm. Like, just have him already be here. And what he was shipping over was the MacGuffin metals that in the script that they have is what they were using to make an atom bomb with.
Yeah.
But Pat, I love your fucking Cerebro thing. I'm mad that I didn't think about it. It's fucking great. Like, the whole building.
I thought you did. You were saying, oh, you didn't? Oh,
no, I got where you were going once you started talking, but like, I didn't mess with the atom bomb part of it, but I love it so much more. Like, I'm going to steal that from you because that's so much better.
Do it.
Have the building be like exactly on the ley line of New York City kind of thing, and have like it being perfectly structured, like the base column or something could be an amplifier for their powers. But he needs to use the what is it, residium, or what do you call
beryllium
it?
Sphere?
The MacGuffin metal, huh?
The beryllium sphere.
Well, the beryllium spear is part of the atom bomb part. Like, the machine that they build has to still come that way. But the material, because they note that coin is like radioactive material, radioactive metal, like heavy metal.
Yeah.
Use that. So like, that's what gets shipped over. Like, that's the thing that gets shipped over that puts the shadow on his case. And eventually we get the reveal sort of going into Act 2, but like, there's a lot of like confusion and mystery. Who is the shadow? What's going on? Who are all these people who are like passing words on? And we see the shadow in action, but we don't see him without like unmasked up at a certain point, because what we should be following more is Margot Lane. She's great. Like, I actually really like her, but I think she should be more important. I think that when her father gets mind controlled, like, I think she should, like, the reveal of Khan should be him taking over her dad's mind and thinking he takes over her mind too, but he doesn't to her. And so that's why it's like, she's like, why are you acting so weird, dad. Like, she's talking to him, like, while he's being mind controlled and working on this project. Like, the guards are acting really weird. She's trying to understand it. So she goes to the police. The police won't listen to her because everyone's like, everything's fine. Like, just roll with that kind of stuff. And eventually she, like, goes and confronts him at the club. And that's where we pan over, and sitting at the table with the commissioner is Lamont Cranston. And they don't know each other because we cut those earlier scenes. But we sort of start setting that up there. Like, that's how they meet in this scenario. So then I would say when the Shadow goes to, like, find Reinhardt Lane, the guards are already taken over. Like, they don't need to be shot down with, like, crossbows by, like, fucking Mongolian warriors. I don't mind having the Mongolian warriors, but I think that they should just not stand out. Like, they should just be outside and about the hotel, and people don't notice them ever, like, on purpose. Like, they're being blocked from everyone's mind.
Yeah.
So that we can have, like,
I mean, honestly,
thugs
if they're ghosts, like he suggested, like Pat suggested, then it's perfect because no one will see them anyway because they're spirits.
That would work fine, but I'm not taking Pats in this scenario. I'm keeping them as being, like, his actual agents, because I think that's fine. Like, have visually distinct enemies to fight in the third act. Sure, why not? But have that fight. That's the bigger thing. Like, we need to get into Act 2 faster. We need to get them paired up sooner, and then we need to have the actual confrontation in the hotel fucking have interesting scenes. Like, the big shots from, like, the trailer that they used is when the Shadow first walks into the hotel and you see his shadow up against the hall of the of the entranceway. Like, they don't do interesting stuff. Like, the guards walk off and we never see the scene. The knife fight could be more interesting because the knife should be a cool thing that they're tussling over the whole time. And at the very end of the movie 3, like, the thing he uses to kill Khan should be the knife. Like, the whole confrontation should be them vying for control of the one physical thing they can use, because it's not that they're telekinetic, that they're able to mentally control this flying dagger. Like, so it's not that he's all of a sudden able to raise up a shard of glass. It's at the very end of it, he's able to finally conquer the knife. Like, earlier, he was able to get it to stop actually stabbing him, but only here is he now finally able to win it. And the way I would do that, considering all of the, like, all right, well, we're cutting the opening, so how do we make the knife important? Even though they lost the set. And so this makes it a little difficult to be like what they should have done, because there's some shots that leaked, which is, so they're in this, like, hall of mirrors, and in the mirrors, you're seeing flashes of his past, as, like, a, crazy evil warlord in Mongolia. You don't need the mirrors. Like, you can just have it in their heads. We should get some actual gunfight. We should have knives, like the knife flying around, like, because, like, the knife is cool. It can be a bonus action attack that Khan has after he takes his main action attack. Like, that's fun. And meanwhile, like, the Shadow is 2-weapon fighting, so he gets a bonus action attack with his guns. Cool. Roll with that. Have the gun kata kind of scene, and then while this is all going on, show flashes, show more. We got a bunch when Margot Lane read his mind, but here we actually get the two of them training, and maybe we can actually, I like the idea of them knowing each other regardless. Like, they can know who each other is from that time before. It doesn't have to be like, who are you? It can be like, Shuan Khan. Ah, you remember me. I thought you had forgotten everything about your past. Kind of stuff when they confront each other earlier on.
Finally,
so that we can
I've been
show
in town
them
all week. Go on, sorry.
But because you can still, like, I'm going to use the phrase green screen, however you would composite it with the technology they had available. I know green screens existed. I don't know what they actually had to use when they were shooting this, but, like, it wouldn't be that hard to, like, put the Mongolia stuff, like, in the background and then them standing in front of it. And, like, the mat work they do in this movie is pretty good. So I have to imagine they can do it. Like, it wouldn't be that hard. And you could do a lot of it in just, like, a black theater. Like, but I think we all agree we need a real boss fight at the end. We need mini boss fights with the Mongolian horde, which we don't get, and we need a real boss fight. And you can set up all those things inside the mental flashes of them, like, training together. Like, we could have, like, a pause in their battle where we see them as young men learning the ways of the flying dagger thing and all that stuff, and how like Lamont just never got it. Like he was always pretty bad at it, and then one day everyone's dead, and like he was like left without his ability to truly train, and so he like returns home remorseful or something. You know, like we don't need them just to arbitrarily hate each other. Like they should actually have some motive, and like this could be a moment for Lamont to get vengeance for him being left to sort of figure out his own way after being set on the right path in the first place.
I mean, also, like, technically, the implication, the fact that Khan has the knife, the implication is that he killed the master, that he took this knife, that he won over. So, like, there could be, like, if you think possibly, I mean, I know when I studied martial arts, I definitely had an affinity for my teachers and my senseis, and like that could be a personal reason to not like someone. Just putting that out there. Like that could actually be a thing that they never actually explored. He just kind of was like, yeah, I won it from him. I got it from him. But there was like an implication that monk is dead now. Like,
right.
Yeah, he killed.
No, it's not an implication. He said
it. Yeah, I think he's
it's
like
supposed to be a motivation.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel like it's a real motivation at all for the Shadow. He's like, oh, cool. People die.
I forgot to. I wanted to use Margot's ability more, where it's like I wanted Margot to actually be the one who locates the hideout, the hotel monument with her. I forgot to mention that too, with her ability.
I think that's good. She does enough of the research anyway. She might as well be the one to sort of figure that part out. Like, there's a shot that I actually really like, which we didn't talk about it because it's not that important, where when Ian McKellen is showing off like the blast radius from the Empire State Building, and like the Navy guys, and the one who's played by the vice.
I have that totally cut out of mine. Like, it's like there's no point.
Yeah, he makes a gay joke, and Shawwan Khan not mind wipes him, but like forces him not. But he's conscious. He's just like unable to stop his body from jumping off.
Yeah.
It's a weird shot because like I don't like the tone of this movie so all over the place.
Yeah.
When he jumps, it pans down to the two of them like
yes,
Lamont
it's behind
and Margot
them
just talking. Yeah, exactly. It happens behind them. And I actually enjoy them not noticing and them just like this is where their banter I really liked. Like them sort of like figuring out what the plan is, and like what like Margot inserting herself into Lamont's behaviors as the Shadow, I think is really good at that spot. And so like that scene was kind of more comedic, so I ended up like having a good vibe for it, because there's sort of like a what is that kind of element when it's happening, and then like the rest of the scene is comedy, so I'm like, oh, I guess it's funny. Okay, cool. I want more of those moments of like them not seeing shit, and like I said, I think the building should be visible in some shots, like the hotel should just be there, the monolith. It's like it's invisible to people, but like it's not that it's not there, it's just that like when they look at it, it's not there. So when we see people, like when we see it from people's points of view, then it's gone. But when we just sort of get like master shots where we the audience are in on more information than the people in the scene, those are when the invisibility should break. Like that's why I think it'd be fun for moments in the fight where if Shawwan Khan is invisible to the Shadow, Lamont's right there, and then we cut to the reverse. Like have moments like that, and maybe that way you keep out some of the bloodshed. Like if they're constantly shooting at shadows, but the other one is like responding as if they had just been shot or dodged, you know, like that way we can keep action in this movie without it being too unfriendly to a child audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think we should focus more on Margot for a while. I think we should have more of the Shadows Network kind of thing. I have notes about how it's like it's weird to open movies with like here's the backstory for our super competent spooky guy. Like Batman Begins only works because everyone knows who Batman is. Like
right.
Like culturally, it's not the first Batman movie. Like Batman Begins would be a terrible first Batman movie. Not first Batman movie in a series, but first Batman movie period. Like if that was the 89 Batman movie, a lot of people would be like, that's a little weird because like you actually kind of want the badass to be a badass for a little bit and then find out how he became a badass. And like the Shadow should be badass and mysterious and like well connected, and we shouldn't be asking like, well, so how did he make these connections? Like, no, it happened before the movie started, and this movie starts before that, and then they skip those steps, so we're left to wonder why or like how that all happened.
We didn't talk about his pneumatic tube system. That's so fucking
I made a reference to it. I actually dig that fucking scene. Like,
no,
it
cool.
feels like Harry Potter.
But it's so conspicuous. It's a tube going along the outside of buildings. So what?
Yes.
Every time he gets a new agent, he has that. I mean, that's a pretty good way to find out who the agents are. Just follow the fucking tubes.
Yeah, seriously.
I think that's why the tubes are so complicated. Like it's not just a straight shot into whatever the location is. They go all over the place.
I mean, honestly, after a while, you're going to start seeing all these people with the same fucking ring. Like, it's not
Right.
like if you were
yeah,
like,
the professors.
if you're like one of
well,
his,
that ties in the Cerebro idea better, because if everyone is like the Shadow is slowly taking over the entire city too, but he's doing it slowly because he's not as good and he doesn't have technical assistance to mind wipe everyone.
He's just as bad. He's taking yeah.
I mean, like,
I'm pretty sure.
honestly,
Go ahead.
based on the fact that he lobotomized someone, I feel like that's true. I don't know if he's a real hero, guys.
I do love the professor is having like breakfast with his wife and he's got the ring on, and when it's Alec Baldwin but he's pretending to be just another agent. We all, Sam, you alluded to a significant other. We all have significant others. I'm pretty sure, I don't know about y'all, my wife, I'm pretty sure would notice if I suddenly started wearing a big dark red gemstone ring on my finger.
Just all the time, because he's supposed to never take it off.
Yes.
Like, especially if you would like so if you never take it off, so like, do you shower with that ring on? And if you shower with that ring on, your significant other is definitely going to notice that you are wearing that ring all the time. You're gonna be like, they may, and depending on how passive aggressive they are, they may not say it to you, but they're definitely talking to like their friends. Like, he's gotten into this new thing. He's like wearing this ring everywhere, and I don't even know where he got it. And it's like kind of gaudy because it's like this giant red gemstone, which I swear it kind of shimmers sometimes. And then he gets all weird and secretive. Do you think he's having an affair?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, especially because he probably like clutches it and then walks away.
Because he's also like,
then all the girlfriends will be like, my husband's doing the same thing too. Oh my God.
Well,
imagine if there is a shadow network of shadow wives of shadow minions.
It's like what is it? The like football wives, like they go together. Like there was like a support club on like AOL or something when I was growing up.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Because my mom was always joking with my dad that she was gonna join it. But like, yeah, because also like he rushed to answer the door before she could, and like
Yes.
like people get like the notes that look like nothing's on them, but then they run out. Like he didn't specifically get it, but like I'm sure some of his other agents have, and I would be like, what the fuck? What is happening? This could ruin some marriages, honestly.
Yeah, Mo's wife was like, another bowling club emergency or whatever. He's like, yeah.
Right, and he just rushes off.
She does not believe it at all. Like, she does not at all. She has had it with her shit. She's starting an affair of her own. I am fairly sure. Mm-hmm. Just from the delivery of that line.
All of Shiwan Khan builds a network, and it's all of his agents are the spouses, the significant others of the shadows who are jilted and upset.
I've got a secret thing too, so there.
Oh man.
I mean, honestly, that would be a super interesting, because that's the Shadow and like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, really, and then you just have you have fights amongst people at home. Just have everyone show up, fight their significant other.
Oh my God, what a montage! The final of all the agents are fighting each other in their home, like. You work for, and they're just while the two hero villain are fighting.
All of New York City erupted. Apparently, it was just couples fighting. But what do you accept from a den of villainy?
Right.
I'm still so offended.
Yeah, it's hard when it's not like Gotham City.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been New York City. It's fine, but like, why you gotta make us a den of villainy? It's just, you know, we got problems, but we're good like anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, so like this is a weird movie to talk about from the standpoint of like in the circle of Shadow fans, like it's usually regarded as pretty good. Like it's a fairly solid synthesis of like the two main source materials that people would reference. And there's a lot of things to really like about it. Like they do, like for all the problems with like the prosthetics, like he looks exactly like the character does on like all the Pulp Fiction covers.
Yeah.
So like if you're down for it, there's that. Like all the casting is great. The visuals are really good. Like Mulcahy started off as a music video guy, and so like the cool shots are there, and the set design's great, and like the matte work to make it all look like 1930s ish is really good. But the opening scene is so fucking rough. Like I think the opening scene ruins the movie, frankly. Like in terms of like being able to appreciate this whole thing,
And the hair,
because Alec Baldwin is. Yeah, well, that's the thing, because Alec
all the
Baldwin just
wigs.
is impossible to take seriously. Every time they like try to make him like an Oriental warlord, it just like doesn't really work. Like every time they flash back to it, it's like, oh right, this is dumb. So those are all kind of rough. And Alec Baldwin continues throughout the whole movie to like not take it seriously, which is annoying because then everyone else has to sort of do the heavy lifting on like moving the plot forward. And so it's just like, oh, like. I know why a lot of people like this movie. Like when I made some jokes about the opening scene, a lot of people came at me on Twitter and other platforms, and I was like, "Oh, all right, let's see how this goes."
If you're listening, you're
but
fucking wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, buds, you're wrong.
Totally wrong. And like,
Well, and it's also 17 years. No, that's not how math works. It's 27 years later.
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
No,
So-
1994 was yesterday. It's cool. It's fine.
It was 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was just like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Roughly like that.
Yeah.
Guys,
But the metrics for like what people were looking for has kind of changed in terms of like what's considered like good for kids and for adults in the same kind of category, and that's sort of like the rough spot they're in, because like the movie appeals to a nostalgia for an audience that is not the target demo for like what actually is going to come from this whole thing.
Yeah.
And it didn't do well. Like the movie only made $48 million on a $40 million budget, which once you factor in marketing is abysmal.
Yeah.
The greatest tragedy of this movie is that it did so poorly that they canceled what was apparently a great Super Nintendo game that the ROMs have leaked, and people are like, this is a fucking good like side-scrolling Final Fight style beat 'em up, which now I like kind of want to go play.
On one of the film reviews from 1994 I read, the headline was, and I'm paraphrasing, this is not the exact headline, but it was like, "The Shadow is being made, but who for?" Because the whole article was like, why are we doing this like old radio story? Like, why are we doing this? Who is this for? This movie's not that good. Like, it looks like the criticism was like basically like, it's visually stunning and like it's casted fine, and which we all agree with. But they were just like, but it like just gets kind of boring and the plot's not sure where to go, and yeah, it's okay. But who is this for? Who is this audience? So I just thought it was really funny because that was one of the things. They were just like, who's showing up to watch this? Who even knows who the Shadow is? And just the point that it was just too
The Shadow knows.
The Shadow knows. The Shadow knows.
What? Yeah. Can I just say, I really like the poster.
The poster's
I
really
think the
good.
poster's fucking great.
Listen,
Yeah.
the visuals
I love
are great.
The poster.
I'm saying the elements are there. The ingredients are there.
Yeah.
They just gotta rearrange them and
Yeah.
take out some of the xenophobia and racism. And
Yeah. I would stay away from the I would you could rewrite his origin story. Nobody really knows. You know? Who's gonna know? Who's gonna know? And you can rewrite it and you can change it and it's fine. I feel like there are plenty
They
of...
also make it more racist in this.
Yeah.
Like, it was vague. Like, it's never like we saw the scenes. It's just, he went to the Orient and learned Taymitism.
he doesn't...
Like,
what he could have been like a sellsword, like a mercenary or something like that. Like,
Yeah. I mean, because, like...
have to...
There's definitely, like... Because I used to listen to, like, the old, like, Superman radio show and look at, you know, on, like, one of those free websites. And I was, like... There were more than a few episodes where my mouth was hanging open because of some of the things that were said that were inappropriate and racist, and I was like, and honestly, like, Superman hasn't incorporated those, so I feel like the Shadow can learn from that. Let's learn good lessons.
Man, there's Sam. I'm actually, I'm taking my time. I'm actually, as someone who's a quote unquote sci-fi author, I'm actually watching the original Star Trek for the first time ever.
Oh, wow.
Like bit by bit. I watch an episode like maybe a week or once a week or something. But
yeah,
holy shit! Literally in the second episode, there's a line of Kirk being like, "I'm just not used to women being on the bridge." I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like
Yeah.
what the like?
Yeah.
And there are definitely things that, like, you go back and you're like, "Ooh, this did not age well," but. And they have their moments, but then there's still things that are redeemable about it. And this movie, it falls in line with that, although it is definitely really bad. Like, there's just moments where I was like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable. This is inappropriate.
The movie in its current form is not a good movie, but that's part of why I went, because I feel this is all it's all potential. It's all unfulfilled potential of this movie, and it's like this could have been a lot of fun and interesting, and yeah. Oh, my mouth hurts from smiling. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you for bringing this pile of horse crap to us.
That's it. Again, it's not a pile of horse crap. It's just the poorly realized lot of potential.
Hey, listen.
It's undercooked horse crap.
Listen, there are nuggets of nutrition in that horse crap. It's still horse crap.
Look at all those chunks of carrots.
Exactly. There's some very beautiful carrots in there. Art Deco carrots.
We're gonna sift out the carrots from the horse crap. We're gonna wash them off. We're gonna wash them really good. Put some tarragon on them. Re-roast them again.
Yeah, it's gonna be delicious. And then we're gonna feed them to puppies because we can't eat them.
Oh my god.
I mean, like, I get why people who are fans of The Shadow dig the things that are in here, because, like, a lot of stuff is realized very well. So if you're looking to see on screen finally a thing, it happens, and it looks appropriate. It's just like, man, it's not exciting enough, and it's racist.
Yeah, I mean, again,
you know the show, Yo, Is This Racist?
Yeah,
this is racist.
Yeah. I will say that I think that they did a good job visually of creating a world that feels real and actualized within itself, even if it doesn't look like New York, and New York is not a place in villainy.
I feel like we've shined a lot of sunlight on this, but why don't we slip and slide on some ice over to some plugs? So, Pat, you do a lot of things.
Well done, man. Well done. Yeah. Okay.
What do you got going on, man?
I am at the Pat Edwards on Twitter. My website is thepatedwards.com. As we've talked about multiple times, I'm part of the Let's Rewatch podcast on this delightful certainpov.com network. I am a writer. I write novels, my space tripping series. So as of you hearing this, there will be a re-release, we'll be on the cusp of a re-release of my first novel, Space Tripping, with a brand new short story that's never been released before. And then a few months after that, in December, the sequel will come out. So just go to my website, thepatedwards.com, check that out. You can, get the first book. The sequel comes out in December. Also, I write on independent 5th edition TTRPG games. The Red Opera is one I basically wrote like half of. That's this epic warlock themed D&D campaign based on an album by a metal band. I know it's a lot to unpack there.
Right, but you wrote the good half.
No, my partner with Kinds is great too. And then I'm one of many writers on another book called Sirens, Battle of the Bards, which is helmed by Satine Phoenix, who is kind of a known entity in that world. And when this comes out, I might have something else really cool in the works that Case might be involved in as well. So go to thepatedwards.com and check that out.
Yeah, Sam, where can people find you?
They can find me here. And if you have any complaints about anything I said about this movie today, you can find Case at...
you can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken. You can find the podcast at Another Pass. All of our stuff is over at certainpov.com. We've been plugging it, so let's just keep plugging it. Let's Rewatch is awesome. I love your show, guys. Like, I'm so glad you're part of the network. When Pat and I first met at GeeklyCon a couple of years ago, it was just like, oh, yeah, I'm going to hang out with this guy. Oh, you have a podcast? Dope. All right. And then I found out that it was hosted by other charming people. And so it's like, wow, how can you have so many charming people on one podcast? I don't know. It's amazing. How do you do it? It's great. You should go listen to it. Let's Rewatch. It's great. Also at certainpov.com, you can find links to tons of other great shows. You can find a link to our Discord server. We're doing this call right now on Discord. So come chat, share memes. We did a big overhaul in terms of how we organized everything. So it's much more readable now that we've sort of categorized things by what genre of podcast that they're working in. So come and hang out. And this will be long after Loki's done. I don't know what the next thing we're going to be like gushing about, but come check it out. Today we were talking about a Russell Mulcahy movie. Next time we're also going to be talking about a Russell Mulcahy movie. Sam, what is that?
Highlander 2, The Quickening. And if you liked this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
I'm in a great place emotionally here because I've been drinking a good amount of my gin and homemade basil syrup cocktails here, and I just helped feed a mama duck and her babies. They made a nest. I am a born and raised city kid who is slowly, as I get older, becoming more and more like folksy. And like I was born, Sam, I'm from Chicago originally, grew up there, like lived in this, like in the city. And now I'm like, the older I get, I've got small kids. My third is due in literally 2 weeks from today. And I'm like, the older I get, I'm like, I could do a couple acre, like 2-3 acres, little mini ranch, and just kind of. And I never in a million fucking years would have thought I would be that way. I'm like, but I'm all like, I'm doing stuff with wild animals. I saved like last summer a whole family of frogs from our window well because it was hot and I got stuck down there, like a mama and some babies. And I like had Tupperware and was like scooping them out. I was like, where's my Disney movie about me now?
I mean, I think it's more of a Pixar film. City guy moves to the country, learns to love all the animals. Yeah. There's going to be something really sad. We're going to be crying at the end.
Yeah, it's like a no words Pixar kind of like short.
Yeah,
just like
it's actually the relationship of him and the frog. Mm-hmm. And, he nurses him back to health. And then there's the moment where, like, the frog has to move on. The frog and the frog family have to leave.
Oh, so the frog gets frog cancer.
But you save its babies, and then you raise the babies, but then they grow into an adult, and they have to go off to be adult frogs in the world. But you, as their surrogate father, has to let go. It's, oh, my God, I'm already crying. I mean, fuck you, Pixar. Fuck you. Have respect for Matt, who has to edit this. Stay on track.
Side note, while we're on that,
all of this in.
Matt,
that's what's going to happen.
Matt, I love you, and I apologize for like at least the 2, maybe 3 times in my excitement I've smacked my mic with my hands. I'm sorry.
I shouted, "I love when Tim Curry died," so I'm pretty sure I should also apologize. Because right after I said that, I was like, "That was loud." I'm sorry, Matt.
Should we fix this movie?
You know what we should do before we fix this movie? Shouldn't we talk about like other stuff on our network?
I know a really good show on this network.
Do you?
Have you ever thought of a movie you used to love back in the day? Like when you were a kid or a teen or a young adult and like, hey, I haven't seen that in a while. I wonder if it still holds up.
Yeah, I have. All the time.
Well, Sam, you're in luck because there's this show called Let's Rewatch where that's what they do. They talk about a movie and then they pause the recording and then they watch the movie and then seconds after finishing it, they hop back on and talk about the movie and see if it held up.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
You're saying you look at the moving pictures.
Yeah.
And then you talk about them.
The hosts are like super charming and attractive and great, cool people. All of them.
I mean, that sounds like a podcast anyone should just tune into, really. Even if they can't see the hosts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.